Chapter 61. Chwiryong's Inheritance 1. There are many types of power. When people mention power, many think about physical strength, and overwhelming violence that lets one fulfill their desire, even if it's forced. The law of the jungle was used in the demon world. That's why violence alone was enough to go against most powers. But it was only most. It couldn't be applied to everything. Physical strength and mana was included in the violence. Powerful strength, supreme mana. In that case, what other power were there? To embryo, having power meant being able to fulfill whatever you desired, imposing your will onto others, and then fulfilling it. Beauty was another amazing power. There's a lot of stories of men acting foolishly in order to capture the heart of beautiful women. It's being able to instigate the other's desire and make them follow. It's being able to accomplish your own desire through beauty. Being intelligent and having the ability to speak well was another power. They were like sharp fangs, and they were more than enough to stab the opponent. Embryo acknowledged it. Those were definitely powers, but they were low-class powers. They were bound to fall in front of overwhelming violence. They weren't worth much when going against violence. It could sound really ignorant and simple-minded, but that was reality. Embryo watched so many strong figures fall because of violence. The power that was in front of them was like that too. Embryo was standing on a destroyed free city, and he was inside a small and cozy house that was located in the center of the city. A really old woman was sitting in front of them. They had the power of wisdom and experience. She lived a very long time, and during that long time, she made the wisdom and experience she obtained her power. She was an advisor, and she was a library of knowledge that knew the world's secrets. She didn't have a way of resisting embryo's violence. It's because she didn't have any knowledge that could make embryo kneel or anxious. No, even if she did have something, embryo wasn't the type to easily surrender. The demon world was large, and there was a limit to her knowledge. The old woman lived in the free city in the southern region, and there was probably another who had just as much as knowledge as her. The old woman knew that very woman. That's why she didn't rush in making a deal. She surrendered in front of embryo's violence and told him everything he wanted to know. The 7 deadly sins. The 7 sins. Some call it a fragment of the demon kings, and others say that it's the demon kings themselves. They spoke in an exaggerated tone, just like other fortune tellers, but it didn't bother him. Embryo quietly listened, and the old woman continued talking. The one that controls the demon world has always been the one that had one of the sins. But in that case, what is sin? What kind of power did it have that the ones that had it were called a king? There was no need for an answer. The large wolves that were circling around embryo started growling, and the old woman quietly laughed. Each of the sins have a power that goes along with the name, but no one knows in detail what kind of power they are. They only make assumptions. For example, lust has the power to tempt the other person, and wrath has the power to make others mad. Wrath, pride, greed, gluttony, lust, envy, sloth. But that's not all. Depending on how it's used, the skill can provide an immense amount of power, but the 7 deadly sins, their real power, is a lot more pure and essential. The old woman stopped talking for a moment and looked at embryo. Many fortune tellers used this method in order to raise the listener's expectations. Embryo looked at the old woman with an indifferent expression. She closed her wrinkly eyes. The king of violence, they're a great king that exists in the demon world, and out of the dragons, they can be considered as the most powerful being. Because of that, they're able to stand next to the other kings despite not owning a sin. It's because they have the dragon heart, which is a large and powerful lump of mana in the demon world. Out of the 6 kings that ruled the demon world, they're the only one that didn't own a sin. Despite just having superhuman powers, they were able to stand next to the other kings. The old woman predicted the end. It was a future that had already been decided right when embryo entered and destroyed the city. She couldn't go against embryo's violence with the power that she had, and as someone that lived a long life, she chose to have a neat ending. Embryo, you're the king of violence. You're not a dragon. You also don't have a sin. That's why you can't be a king. You won't be able to sit on the throne. The old woman placed a small pipe in her mouth. She inhaled the smoke, and embryo left the house. The wolves gave her her last moment. He couldn't become king because he didn't have a sin. Embryo just shook his head. He wasn't sure if it was a useless resistance, but he denied it. There was someone that became a king even though they didn't have a sin. The fact that they were the best dragon in the demon world wasn't important. Embryo looked towards the south. He gazed at the edge of the demon world. Sugar. I need sugar. After interpreting Kaiwan's journal all night, Young-ho lied down on top of the desk. There were definitely results. First, his reading comprehension improved a lot. Teresa's saying that it's best to learn a language in bed. Learning from the opposite sex isn't the best. It meant that, in order to quickly learn a language, one needed to have the will and interest to learn it. Interpreting Kaiwan's journal was pretty fun. Peeking into another, especially a girl's journal, wasn't the fun part. Young-ho wasn't that low. Never, never. It was a strong denial. But anyways, Kaiwan's journal was pretty entertaining. Young-ho thought of Kaiwan's journal as a treasure map. The more he interpreted it, the location of the treasure appeared, was the thought he had. So, of course, it was entertaining. On top of that, it was a journal, not some document. It was funny how he was trying to interpret the sentence, despite not knowing much about the alphabet. But Kaiwan had pretty nice handwriting. There wasn't really a reason to write long sentences, but since she mostly wrote short sentences, it was readable. And the various comments that popped up were refreshing and witty. Unlike her outer appearance, she actually might have been a cheerful woman. And she cherished her little brother the most. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that half of her journal was about her little brother. If he didn't know before, then he would have mistaken Kaiwan as his mother, not an older sister. After Kaiwan went missing, how would have Kaiwan reacted if she found out about her little brother's life? She was like his mom, and as someone he looked up to, he was losing her inheritance day by day. The disease in his weak body would die with him, and he didn't even get the chance to resist. Kaiwan was younger than he imagined. Saying that she was more like a child was fitting. Same age as me. Maybe 1 or 2 years older. Kaiwan didn't write in her journal every day. Sometimes she wrote every day, and other times she would write a few times a week. After reading the information on the first page, he realized that this was her 5th and last journal. If he assumed that one journal contained 2 years' worth of entries, then it meant that she disappeared in her early 20s. A little girl in her teens became the owner of a falling family. And for 10 years, she managed to overcome all sorts of difficulties and help the family rise up. He was able to get an idea of how strong Kaiwan was, but he was sure that Kaiwan was a lot stronger than Young-ho's current power. Young-ho looked at Kaiwan's ring, which was on his left hand, and raised his upper body. He only managed to interpret the beginning of the journal, and after closing it, he placed a large piece of paper in front of him. Young-ho used the map that was drawn in the journal as the base and drew Kaiwan's journal. He stopped midway, and since it was a blueprint that would contain his future plan, there was no rule that said that the sections that were currently hidden would appear on the map. On top of that, the layout of the dungeon changed because of the 2 previous owners, and since Young-ho reorganized the dungeon, it was safe to say that the dungeon was totally different. But Young-ho still found a way. No matter how much he reorganized the dungeon, there are parts that he couldn't change. The dungeon's entrance, water source, and gold mine were fixed locations. Young-ho used the distance between the entrance and the gold mine as the base, and drew the dungeon map so that it was the same scale as Kaiwan's map, and by overlapping the 2, it filled the dungeon map's empty space. The spirit training ground, library, magic research laboratory, the official torture chamber, and large prison that Eligor loved so much. The arena that Young-ho wanted wasn't drawn on the map, but Young-ho remembered the information about how Kaiwan targeted more than 80 of the first floor. There weren't a lot of empty spaces in Kaiwan's blueprint. If the arena existed in the first floor, then that meant that the arena entrance was located somewhere in the empty area. A general outline of the map and the directions, he had a good idea of what he needed. Sorry. When she died, no, disappeared, she was about the same age, so he spoke as if he was talking to a friend. Young-ho lightly tapped the journal on the palm of his hand. Instead of reading more of Kaiwan's secrets, he stood up from his seat. Please call Eligor, Catalina, and Rickham into the throne room. Yes, sir. And at least wash your face before leaving. You have a handsome face, Lucia spoke, and Young-ho chuckled. He touched the prickly beard on his chin. So what you're saying is that you're going to explore your own dungeon. Rickham thought it was strange, and his expression showed it. It was understandable because it was like the house owner wanted to explore their own house. Yong-ho felt embarrassed, so he spoke after clearing his throat. Rickham, as you know, the House of Mammon's dungeon is old. The facilities that Kaiwan created are hidden in the darkness. What I'm saying is that I need to find those. There were only 4 people that knew the truth about how the House of Mammon's dungeon was a labyrinth. It was Yong-ho, Catalina, and Eligor. And Citri as well, since she's the one that told him this truth. There wasn't a need to tell Rickham about the secret. And he felt bad for thinking this, but he didn't trust Rickham as much as Catalina or Eligor. Oh, so that's what you meant. Understood. Then shall I call the others? Kaiwan was sort of like a free pass. Rickham nodded after understanding Yong-ho's goal, and then asked. Yong-ho shook his head. No, it'll only be me, Catalina, Skull, and Salami, and Spot Rickham. Take the others and help with the dungeon's defense. Exploring a dungeon gave them the opportunity to fill the development rate. Catalina and Skull were the main guards of the dungeon, so he couldn't leave them behind. The salamander Yong-ho decided to take Salami because he wanted to quickly evolve them, so his personal greed was involved in the decision-making. He decided to take Spot to use them as a messenger and scout. Understood, sir. As you wish. Rickham showed respect towards Yong-ho. Yong-ho looked back at Eligor. The Princess Anuria will be fine without Spot. Right, it'll be fine. She mostly spends her time in her room anyways. She has been learning small tasks from Jun, but even though she's good with her hands, she does tend to space out. Yuria spent her time in the breeding farm, which was located near the gold mine. Since she was still young, she wasn't able to create a colony of crazy ants. But after mining all the gold in the gold mine, he was planning on building a new colony. The problem is that I don't have a way of filling her developing rate. This was an issue he could resolve after a training ground has been built. Yong-ho talked to Eligor once more. After moving Bugrim to the workshop, give them something to do. We need to check to see if he has the will to work. I understand Il asked them to create shelves or chairs. It hasn't been confirmed yet, but ever since a professional entered the dungeon, Eligor, the housekeeper of the dungeon, looked happy. They managed to complete the urgent tasks. After recalling Ophelia and Endalion, Yong-ho wanted to take Eligor with him as well, but he managed to stop himself. For Eligor, there were far more important things than him evolving. Okay, let's prepare for the exploration and meet back here in 10 minutes. After Yong-ho spoke, Catalina quickly answered and stood up. After Skull answered, they started rolling on the ground as if they had nothing to do. 10 minutes later, he let Spot, who was overfilled with excitement, lead the way, and Yong-ho walked out of the throne room with the spirits. The official exploration to find Kaiwan's inheritance began. Chapter 62, Kaiwan's Inheritance 2. Even if it was a simple exploration, it was a lot better than when they were exploring the armory and gold mine. During that time, they didn't know where anything was and had to assume the direction. But this time, they had a map. Even though the owner from 2 generations ago inherited the throne, the gold mine was taken from them by the crazy ants. They even had to give up their loving sister's belongings, so they were probably in an urgent situation. And it meant that the areas after the gold mine room remained as Kaiwan's. The map he found in Kaiwan's journal was more of a blueprint that included her future plans. However, the areas around the gold mine were probably already built during Kaiwan's time, so he was still sure that the map was accurate. After arriving in front of Kaiwan's office, he waved his finger and displayed the dungeon map and Kaiwan's map that he drew in the air. Before starting the exploration, he looked back at Catalina. How are you with using your shadow? Have you gotten used to it? Catalina hesitated for a moment and answered as her ears weakly dropped. I haven't perfected it yet. The more I use it, I feel like there's more to it. I think I'll have to use it as an additional attack for now. Boom, would you like to see it? He had no reason to decline, so after taking a few steps back, he nodded his head. Spot quickly caught on, so they grabbed Salami's tail and pulled them back. Catalina kept her distance from the others, and after taking a deep breath, she unsheathed the dagger that was on her belt, and then she quickly cut through the air. It was definitely one movement. But after Catalina cut the air, something black appeared behind Catalina's arm, and it cut the air again. The shadow cut the exact spot that Catalina's first cut did, and then disappeared like smoke. After advancing to a shadow runner, it's a new skill that she learned. The skill required her to use a dark element mana, but it was more of a martial arts technique than magic. Will she be able to manipulate it once she gets used to it, or will the number of additional hits increase? Since there wasn't any information about it, she had to figure it out by studying. But she really looks like a demon now. Describing Catalina's amazing body movement as being acrobatic wasn't enough, and describing her as a demon wasn't fitting. She didn't really use mana all that much. Good job. I'm looking forward to your growth. Thank you. After hearing Yongho's compliment, Catalina became really happy and sheathed her dagger. Spot also looked excited after seeing an interesting sight. He'll start activating the inactive passageways. Lucia stepped in and activated the passageways. The first area they were going to explore was the training ground. Nice. The gold mine and the training ground weren't that far apart, and monsters didn't appear on the newly developed passageway that was between those two areas. There was only about 2 slimes. It was expected. The inner part of the dungeon past the gold mine was used to store the core facilities of the dungeon rather than used to block the enemy's attack. Since the facilities were placed to make the living conditions better, the distance between the facilities was close, and since they weren't far from the gold mine, other dungeon monsters weren't there. It'll begin the activation process for the spirit training ground. Once mana was poured into it, light appeared, and it showed a room that was as big as the throne room. A few of the crazy ants that were in there started crawling across the ground and walls as if they were trying to run away. When Yongho signaled with his eyes, with Spot on their back, Salami flew towards the crazy ants to kill them. Since it wasn't a dangerous fight, Yongho turned his attention to the inside of the training ground. It was similar to a worn gym. The ceiling was a bit higher than the other rooms, and the ground was filled with dirt. Beside the rectangular section, which was probably a fighting arena, the puppets that you see in games were standing there. Skull started hitting the puppets with their hammer as if to show an example. For some reason, Yongho felt that Skull's development rate was increasing every time they were hitting the puppets, so he instinctively activated the power of evolution. Wow, it really is increasing. Skull already evolved several times, so even if they hit the puppets a lot, they'll most likely get 1 point. Anyways, the important thing was that the development rate did increase. Out of all the spirits, Eligor popped into Yongho's head. From the possible advancement routes that were displayed, Yongho was interested in the red demon, beast. Since the word beast was next to it, Yongho was excited to see what kind of skill he would obtain. I'm sure they're a fighting race. A fighting race. Yongho smiled and opened the dungeon map again by waving his finger. He was planning on discovering the other facilities like this. And then, Skull stopped hitting the puppets and looked around. On top of that, Salami, Spot, and Catalina were all looking in the same direction, Yongho as well. They felt the flow of strong mana beyond the wall, but it wasn't that far. Therese, an unusual amount of concentrated mana in the air. This isn't a good sign. The dungeon shop's basic data and the current situation distortion. Lucia's calm voice changed to a high-pitched voice at the end. Lucia spoke as if she was shooting her words out. The unusual amount of concentrated mana is causing a distortion. Therese, a high chance that dungeon monsters will pass through the opening that's caused by the distortion. It's difficult to tell what kind of monsters will pass through. Please get to a safe location for now. It must have been a really urgent matter, because instead of notifying only Yongho, she created a message in light and notified Catalina as well. Yongho recalled Eligor's explanation in the past. Distortion was one of the reasons why dungeon monsters appeared. The crazy ants and Salami also appeared through this method. If they appeared while Kaiwan was the owner, they would have been killed, but the past 2 owners weren't able to do anything. In the end, the gold mine and armory were taken from them. The same thing could happen again. Catalina looked at Yongho. Yongho quickly made a decision. Lucia, tell me where the distortion is being created. According to Kaiwan's map, it's in a vacant lot that's located right next to the training, sir. Yongho took out. Amon Catalina understood Yongho's thought, and she immediately unsheathed her weapon, and Skull nodded their head. He wasn't going to run. After the distortion opens, he was planning on getting rid of the dungeon monsters. The spirits here were currently the strongest soldiers in the House of Mammon. If the monsters couldn't be stopped with this group, then there's a high chance that the dungeon monsters can be stopped in the future. Lucia understood Yong-ho's thoughts. That's why she groaned as if she was hesitating. But it didn't last long. Lucia immediately activated the passageway that led to the area next to the training ground. Dungeon monsters will soon appear through the distortion. If you're going to do it, please hurry and don't get hurt. Yong-ho smiled and then ran. With Catalina in the lead, the other spirits ran as well. Because of the excess amount of mana caused by the distortion, I'm unable to activate the area. I have notified Eligor and Rickham of the current situation. Rickham will be arriving with a support unit. Beyond the passageway, Yong-ho saw darkness. Within the darkness, there was a whirlpool of mana. Spot got off of Salamis' back and took out a stick-looking lighting device from the bag they carried and threw it onto the ground. And then, white lights appeared from the sticks, causing a portion of the darkness to disappear. Catalina and Skull couldn't read the mana's color and element, but they were able to see the distortion. It looked like a heat wave that was spinning unusually fast. It was swaying in the air and released an unusual energy. Distortions can appear in any dungeon. The important thing was how it's handled after it appears. The area itself wasn't that big. It was only a quarter of the training ground they were just in. Yong-ho stood near the entrance with the spirits in case they needed to escape. He ordered Salami to aim at the distortion. The moment dungeon monsters appeared out of the distortion, Salami was going to shoot out fire. Depending on the situation, Yong-ho was going to add Ayaman's fire as well. Using fire to deal with the situation was better than fighting them. Salami gathered the fire and glared at the distortion. Yong-ho looked at the mana's color and element again. Different colors made up the distortion, but it turned into one color. Red. The distortion stopped. The mana that was whirlpooling exploded and a strong light lit the area. Swoosh. The moment the light was in his sight, Yong-ho yelled. Salami opened their mouth while closing their eyes and shot out the fire they gathered. The fire that they released was a lot stronger than Yong-ho's. The fire overpowered the light. Even though he didn't hear any screams, he smelled something burning and heard the sound of wings flapping powerfully. Yong-ho was able to clearly see again. Yong-ho widened his eyes and looked straight ahead. Even though it was only for a couple of seconds, Salamis' fire was still in the room. He saw a large bug. The distortion hasn't closed yet, so bug-like monsters were coming through and were greeted by Salami's fire. The plan was a success. Since Salami was getting tired, Yong-ho immediately raised Ayaman. But during that moment, Salami's fire was split into two. A strong fire was released from the distortion, and it broke through Salami's fire. Yong-ho recalled his first battle with Salami. He overpowered Salami's power by using Ayaman's fire, and this was a similar situation. Tactic. It's a fire tactic, Catalina yelled. The fire that shot out of the distortion made it difficult to see the figure, but they were able to see that it was the body of a large male. He could tell through his senses. Fire didn't work on them. They needed another method. Skullily. Skull bravely charged and swung their hammer, but it was useless. It was impossible to hit fire with a hammer. The figure ignored Skull's attack and looked at the tired Salami, Yong-ho, and Catalina. They unified the fire that was in both of their hands, and just like Salami, they created a large fire. It was a moment of life and death. Catalina grabbed Spot's waist, who froze in place and kicked off the ground. Despite being tired, Salami looked at the fire, and Yong-ho stood in front of Salami to protect them and released Ayaman's fire. Both fires clashed. While holding Spot in one arm, Catalina kicked off the ceiling and wall and ended behind the figure. With her shadow, she threw the dagger. It was useless this time too. It looked like the shadow made a small impact after the dagger was thrown, but all it did was slightly push through the fire. But Catalina wasn't trying to take down the fiery figure. By attacking from behind, she was trying to turn their attention away from Yong-ho. Yong-ho pierced through the fire. The fire that Arman released enveloped the enemy's fire and headed straight towards the unknown figure. The figure quickly turned their attention back to Yong-ho after Catalina distracted them. But when they did, the distance between Yong-ho and the fiery figure had closed. The figure violently swung their arms. A wave of fire was shot from the sky towards Yong-ho's head, and it was a horrible sight. But Yong-ho didn't close his eyes. Arman released more fire, and Yong-ho watched the stranger. The wave of fire enveloped Yongho's face. It mixed with Amon's fire, and it dispersed into the air. Despite what was currently happening, Yongho took a step forward. It was hot. The sight of the fire enveloping both figures was a diversion. He thought Amon's fire would be enough to defend against the fire, but the way his instincts reacted to the fire was something he couldn't control. The fire was shot down from above him. Amon's fire and the enemy's fire clashed once again. It exploded, and Amon's fire that enveloped Yongho's body disappeared. The temperature increased. He wanted to close his eyes. The fire that was created by the unknown figure was blazing in front of Yongho. Amon's fire wasn't all-powerful. When he first fought Salami, he used Amon's fire to defend, and he was only able to win because Skull kept on attacking Salami's body. Then where? Where was he supposed to attack when they were covered in fire? Yongho looked at the man's flow. Despite the dangerous situation, he concentrated really hard. He saw another color within the fire. The thing that was swirling was the core of the fiery figure. Yongho released another fire. He pushed his left arm into the fire instead of Amon. They exploded again. The fiery figure and Yongho couldn't hurt each other, but Yongho didn't care. He read their mana and extended his hand towards the core. Instead of Amon's fire, he released the mana that was stored inside the bracelet. It wasn't fire. It was coldness. It was the mana that he obtained by absorbing the Queen Ant and Forest Spirit. With Kaiwan's journal, he found the bracelet, and it allowed him to store mana in it. During the fight with the landworm, he used all the mana that was stored in there and filled it with coldness mana. Yongho had a hard time controlling his mana, so it took him a long time to store mana inside it, but it didn't matter. From the free city to the dungeon, the only thing he had left was time. Yongho still didn't know how to use magic. He was merely pouring out the coldness, but that was enough. The coldness drove out the fire. He made it so that the core of the fiery figure froze. The figure screamed out in pain. Yongho ignored it because it sounded like the wind. With all his might, he grabbed the frozen core. Like a weak piece of ice, the core broke. As the figure screamed, the fire that formed the figure dispersed and nothing was left. Just the heat from the fire proved that the fiery figure existed. Pant, pant. Yongho stumbled as he started breathing heavily. Catalina quickly supported him. There aren't any signs that show that more dungeon monsters will appear through the distortion. Good job. You did really well. I'll notify Eligor and Rickham about the current situation. Yongho tightly closed his eyes after hearing Lucius' calm voice. He felt mana from the remaining core, even if it was really weak. It might be too much to absorb it, but it wouldn't be a problem to give it to Lucia as a snack. He didn't think an enemy who wasn't affected by fire would appear. But he killed them in the end. Catalina couldn't contain her joy and smiled brightly. The distortion will naturally disappear, but you never know what might happen, so I suggest you keep your distance from the distortion. It was a reasonable argument, but instead of backing out, he fixed his stance by leaning on Catalina. Even though the swirling distortion shrunk, he closely observed the mana's flow. Distortions appear when an unusual amount of mana is gathered. It meant that the distortion itself was a huge lump of mana. Master, master. Catalina and Lucia both called out. Instead of answering the two, Yongho extended his hand out towards the distortion, and naturally, the greed inside Yongho opened their mouth. Chapter 63. Kaiwan's Inheritance 3. He wasn't consciously doing it. Yongho was mentally and physically exhausted, and that's why his instincts really kicked in greed. It was one of the 7 deadly sins, and it was guiding Yongho. There was no end to their desire, and they wanted the swirling lump of mana that was in front of them. The demon world was created through mana. The air, rock, and soil mana was inside everything that was in this world. Of course, the amount of mana was different. Like the wind, mana flew around the demon world. That never-ending flow created difference. This flow of mana was a phenomenon created by the distortion, like a small whirlpool that's created in a river. A different flow that's been created in an unexpected section. The distortion was dangerous. It was something that shouldn't be dealt with carelessly. But greed didn't care about that. It seemed like they wanted it even more because it was dangerous. Catalina gulped. She wasn't used to mana, and because of that, she couldn't assume just how dangerous the distortion in front of her was. Since it became smaller, the only thing she could assume was that it was less dangerous than before. But Lucia was different. Even if the dungeon shop didn't input any information, she was the spirit of the dungeon. She was able to really feel the flow of the mana within the dungeon. Even if it became smaller, it was still a distortion. The mana was spinning at a fast rate, and it wasn't any different from a lethal weapon. If Yong-ho placed his hand on it, his body might break because he's unable to endure the distortion. But he didn't hear any voices. It hasn't been that long since Lucia had been born, so she wasn't sure how to describe the current situation. It was rare for a spirit of a dungeon to be able to feel this much emotion. Was she supposed to tell him to depend on her? Her owner performed impossible tasks before she was sure that her owner would surprise her this time too. No, she shouldn't think like that. It was really dangerous to have expectations. Master Lucia managed to speak, but Yong-ho didn't stop. He wasn't simply being controlled by greed. Yong-ho also wanted the distortion that was in front of him. And he wasn't being forced to stretch his hand out. Yong-ho was able to see the flow of mana. And at the tip of his hand, he was able to feel greed's energy follow the mana's flow. Yong-ho didn't go against the flow. Greed naturally joined the distortion's flow. "Oh!" Catalina exclaimed unconsciously. The distortion caused the space to look like a heat shimmer, and unexpected colors started pouring out of it. Catalina and Skull also saw the same thing that Yong-ho had seen before. The distortion accepted greed at first, and it was now following greed. The concentrated lump of mana naturally slowed down its speed, and greed let the remaining mana flow away. Greed wasn't gluttony. If they couldn't handle it, they didn't eat it. The colorful vortex completely stopped, and it was being sucked into Yong-ho's right hand. Yong-ho saw how greed transferred the lump of mana, and it was similar to how they absorbed spirits. It was different from when greed absorbed spirits. The mana had more variety than the spirits, and Yong-ho was able to feel it. For the spirit, it only contained the owner's demon power. For the queen ant and forest, the spirit provided coldness, but the distortion was nature's mana. It was a lump of mana that's been collected from the demon world. The mana had different qualities, and the demon world's natural mana was circulating inside Yong-ho's body. It was refreshing. He felt the same fullness as when he finished a delicious dish. The colorful mana pleasured his eyes, and the different attributes woke the senses that had been asleep inside Yong-ho. 7 colored stars. A spirit has a color and attribute, and this didn't only apply to humans. It applied to any being that had a spirit. The attribute and color of the demon world's mana didn't completely fall into the 7 colored stars. However, there were some that resembled them, and Yong-ho was able to feel his spirit. The distortion didn't increase Yong-ho's mana a lot. However, for the spirits that he absorbed before, the distortion made them completely his. It's like it cleaned up the messy Lego blocks that were stacked on top of each other. For the attributes that he originally had, he felt them grow. Yong-ho opened his eyes. He felt refreshed, not tired. The exhaustion that he felt a moment ago seemed like it was all in his head, because his body was now filled with energy. Master. Yong-ho turned his head towards where the voice was coming from, and saw Catalina with her ears dropped. Behind her, he saw Eligor and Rikum as well. "You're okay." "Right. It's been over 30 minutes since you absorbed the distortion's mana, and this might seem unexpected, but your mana recovery rate has increased tremendously. Even though it's a small amount, the mana volume increased as well." Yong-ho nodded his head when he heard Lucia. It sounded like he fell into a trance. "Master." Catalina didn't hear him answer, so she carefully called out once more. Yong-ho smiled to reassure her and petted Catalina's head. Catalina was relieved, which caused her to let out a sigh of relief. Eligor, who was standing behind her, felt the same way as her. "We ran over here because we were told that a distortion appeared. Thankfully, you were able to take care of it, sir." Yong-ho felt safe when he saw Eligor's warm smile. When he looked around, Yong-ho noticed that the orc warriors were here as well. When Yong-ho's eyes met Rikum's, Rikum flinched and hesitated, but he ended up talking. He carefully asked, "If I may ask, did you absorb the distortion's mana?" "Not all of it, just a little." Yong-ho smiled and massaged his shoulders. He then asked Eligor, "Looks like I caused a commotion. Anyways, how much of it did you hear?" It was kind of an odd question, but Eligor immediately understood what Yong-ho asked. "It's been 20 minutes since we arrived. Catalina told us about the battle. It's a relief that it's been taken care of before things got worse. Since Eligor served the past two owners, dungeon monsters were horrific disasters to him. Ligin were insect-type monsters that appeared together with fire. Since the Lagins lived in volcanic regions, they were highly resistant against fire, but it seemed like they didn't have the ability to endure the fire that was shot right into their faces. Distortions can appear anywhere within the dungeon, but the House of Mammon's dungeon has a higher chance of distortions appearing than the other dungeons. Even though it was a bit late, it sounded like Lucius' intention was to inform him about the distortion as much as possible. Usually, the spirit of the dungeon controls the dungeon. That's why the flow of mana is more stable than outside of the dungeon, and it lowers the chance of distortions appearing. However, the House of Mammon's dungeon is too wide for me to control, and because of the Incantropagnium, mana flows a lot faster and more violently than other regions. Sometimes, distortions cause larger distortions to appear. There's a high chance that dangerous dungeon monsters are living in the underground area of the House of Mammon. It meant that Mammon's spirits weren't the only ones that were in danger. The House of Mammon's underground area was like a pandemonium. Since no one knew what kind of evil spirit or monster lived down there, it's obvious as to why the previous owners gave up on developing it. But that wasn't the case for Kaiwan, and Yong-ho was the same as well. When Yong-ho remained silent, Catalina looked at him worriedly. After patting Catalina's head again, he sheathed Aemon and looked around. He commanded Lucia to activate the empty lot. They'll begin the activation. Please wait a minute. She really only took a minute. After a minute, mana was flowing into the empty lot. Unlike the other rooms, the mana became light and was hanging from the ceiling. When the darkness disappeared, Yong-ho was able to get a better look at the room. A room made out of stone, but it was different from the ordinary inactive rooms. There were complicated-looking letters on the ground and wall, and the remains of an unknown being were scattered all over the place. Yong-ho quickly opened Kaiwan's map in the air. But this room couldn't be found on the map at all. Lucia spoke. Dungeon facility, the Gate of Space. It looks like they stopped building this midway. The Gate of Space. Eligor and Catalina reacted to Yong-ho's voice. Their expression was a bit awkward to say that they were just surprised, but Yong-ho didn't have the energy to notice small changes like that. He unconsciously became excited and asked Lucia, "What do you mean stopped midway? Then, does that mean it's possible to finish building it?" He didn't know why Kaiwan was trying to building the Gate of Space. He didn't know if they cancelled it for a reason or if they disappeared while it was being built. It was impossible to know. The possibility of completing the Gate of Space was what was important to Yong-ho right now. In the beginning, Yong-ho's goal was to build the dungeon to the point where he's able to build a door that allowed him to return to the human world. Lucia hesitated after hearing Yong-ho's excited voice, and then cautiously answered, "It's impossible. The current me is not able to maintain and operate the Gate of Space, and on top of that, it's impossible for me to install it. But once I grow a bit more, it will be possible. It's not entirely impossible, so don't be too disappointed. I see it's impossible right now." Since he had expectations, his voice was filled with disappointment. Catalina and Eligor reacted sensitively this time too. Catalina quietly released a sigh of relief, and Eligor released his fist. Yong-ho couldn't focus on those two. After he shook his head to get rid of his disappointment, he looked at the spirits. "Anyways, it worked out great. Thanks for running all the way here. But I think it's alright for you guys to go back." After showing their respect to Yong-ho, Rikum and the orc warriors exited. Eligor asked Yong-ho, "I think it would be best if you stopped here and rested as well, sir." Even though the group only found one facility after they started exploring, it was a pretty fierce battle. It was only natural for Eligor to suggest that Yong-ho rest for the remainder of the day. But Yong-ho shook his head. Time wasn't on Yong-ho's side yet. It wasn't as urgent as when there were warnings of forest attack, but at this moment, the owners in the empty region were moving. It doesn't mean that I'm going to overdo it. I'll return after securing a bit more of the passageway, so don't worry. Yes, sir. I'll make sure that the food and bath are ready when you return. That would be great. After showing his respect, Eligor left the empty lot. Yong-ho felt kind of weird about exploring his own home. "Anyways, shall we continue?" Yong-ho spoke, and Catalina and Skull answered Salami, and Spot looked energetic as well. But an unexpected interference occurred. Master, the dungeon meerkat sent a report. Therese, someone approaching the dungeon really fast. I believe it's Ophelia, the spirit from outside you spoke of. Ophelia. It was Ophelia. She did promise to visit the House of Mammon soon, but it's only been 2 days since Yong-ho arrived at the House of Mammon's dungeon. She came faster than he had expected. After contemplating a bit, Yong-ho made his decision. He turned around. Let's stop here. Yong-ho couldn't stop thinking about how fast Ophelia decided to visit. It's possible that the other owners were moving discreetly. Spot was in the lead, and Catalina and Skull protected Yong-ho by staying beside him. Ophelia, the daughter of Endelion, would like to have an audience with the owner of the Great House of Mammon. Chapter 64. Chwiryong's Inheritance 4. Ophelia, the daughter of Endelion, would like to have an audience with the owner of the Great House of Mammon, the throne room. Ophelia kneeled in front of Yong-ho, who was sitting on the throne. Catalina was standing on the left side of the throne room, and Eligor, Rikum, and Skull were standing at the bottom of the steps, which were created during the reorganization. Out of all the spirits that were currently in the House of Mammon, Ophelia was the strongest. On top of that, since she was the leader of a group for a long time, there was a certain dignity in her movements. No, maybe class. Seeing Ophelia show her respect towards him reminded him of the demon that he imagined when he was younger and felt like he was one step closer to becoming that demon. But now wasn't the time for him to be happy about fulfilling his desire. Yong-ho was curious as to why Ophelia suddenly decided to visit him, but he hid his impatient side by speaking calmly. Thank you for coming this far. You visited a lot sooner than I expected. It's because I became the House of Mammon's spirit. I need to understand the interior of the dungeon, and the situation outside of the dungeon is changing fast. Ophelia was wearing the same bartender outfit she was wearing at the bar, and was straightforward about her visit. Yong-ho actually preferred this method since he didn't know much about the complicated etiquettes. Yong-ho was also straightforward. What's the situation like with the other owners? It seems like they'll start moving within a few days. Forast's death and defeat has now become a fact. It's been a while since they left to invade the House of Mammon and haven't returned yet. This was something that Ophelia and Yong-ho spoke about before at the pub. In order to attack a different dungeon, an owner needed at least a few dozens of units, and a unit of that size is bound to stick out no matter what. In the northwest region of Forast's dungeon, the House of Abigail is located, and their movements seem unusual. Not only did they visit the pub yesterday to gather information, but they even hired a mercenary group that was within the Free City. It was obvious what they were trying to do. A frown appeared on Yong-ho's face. How's Forast's dungeon? The spirits have started leaving. It's natural for soldiers to leave an army that was losing. Even though spirits live inside the dungeon, they know what's happening outside of the dungeon. The spirit of the dungeon died, and a new owner ascended to the throne. The owner that protected the House of Forast for many years no longer existed. The reason why Forast made his move was because the empty southern region was starting to become chaotic. There was no point in sitting still while the others were starting to make their move. Out of the free spirits, the orcs have left the dungeon first. As you know, the orcs were the main spirits in the House of Forast. Gokun, who controlled those orcs, is no longer there, and it's been reported that most of the important figures were killed during the fight with the House of Mammon. The commander didn't only give commands during war. Maintaining the morale of the troops was their job as well. Yong-ho looked back at Rikum after listening to Ophelia. Rikum was one of the commanders, and with a slightly sad expression, he answered, Orcs respect the strong. Currently, there isn't anyone in the House of Forast that's strong enough to control the orcs. It wasn't really the most comforting thing to hear. The orcs weren't wandering mercenaries that were hired by the House of Forast. They were spirits, and to be specific, they were close to being official troops of the House of Forast. Shame was written on Rikum's face. It wasn't because he was ashamed of the orcs that were in the House of Forast. Rikum was the first one to leave the House of Forast after all. His and the life of his men were in danger, and even though they were involved in a fight they couldn't win, it was a fact that they left the House of Forast and chose to serve the House of Mammon. If they ended up being in the same situation again, how would they handle it? Would they leave the House of Mammon? Would they have enough courage to say no? Yong-ho sensed that Rickham was feeling troubled on the inside, so he turned his attention to Ophelia. Since Yong-ho felt that there was something odd, he didn't have anything else to say. Ophelia spoke. The first one to leave is like the first piece in a row of dominoes. As more spirits leave, the hearts of those that are left will quickly weaken, and in the end, a large amount of spirits will leave the dungeon. It wasn't just me. Someone else started it. Everyone else did it. I wasn't the first one, like Ophelia stated. It was like a domino. Yong-ho was reminded of the students that didn't clean and ran away when he attended school. It was a completely different situation, but the basic context was the same. Eligor maintained a calm expression, but Catalina's face became dark. Her ears and tail looked weak. It was something that the House of Mammon already experienced. Even though the House of Mammon fell, it only took a few days for all the spirits to leave the dungeon. Catalina and Eligor were the only ones that remained. The other owners already know what's happening. It's because the orcs that left the House of Foraz either entered the Free City or visited the other owners and asked the owners to hire them. Foraz died. The spirits were leaving the dungeon. The issue with the House of Foraz wasn't the only thing that was making the owners impatient. The chaos caused by Embryo is growing. Owners in various parts have started dungeon battles. The owners that joined forces and other owners that were defeated have decided to invade a different dungeon or defeat an owner so that they can increase their power. They are no longer forming an alliance. The situation was totally different from when the House of Mammon's previous owner committed suicide. The owners were forced to make a move. In order to protect their respective dungeons, they had to fight. Yong-ho realized how serious the situation was. The House of Foras was like a shield, and if they fall without a fight, then it wouldn't benefit Yong-ho in any way. Ophelia took a fist-sized crystal ball from her inner pocket. Eligor approached her, and after giving him the crystal ball, she spoke. It's a long-distance communication device. I'll send you my reports through this device from now on. Yong-ho nodded his head after obtaining the crystal ball from Eligor. Just like Kaiwan's ring and bracelet, he felt mana within the crystal ball. It was Ophelia's mana. Thank you for coming all this way, and for the information as well. First get some rest, and then take a look around the dungeon. Ophelia, the daughter of Endelion, will obey your commands, sir. After Ophelia showed her respect, Yong-ho let Eligor take care of her and stood up from the throne. Yong-ho needed time to think as well. The meeting was over. The dungeon's condition is better than I expected, Ophelia commented as she followed Eligor around the dungeon. I'm serious. It's been a long time since the previous owner died. The House of Mammon experienced the same issue that the House of Foras was going through right now, so she assumed that the dungeon would be in a chaotic state. But what happened? Ophelia thought there was only going to be a straight passageway that led to the throne room, but the House of Mammon looked like a legit dungeon. Eligor felt proud when he heard Ophelia's compliment. A warm smile appeared on his face. This is all thanks to our master, I can tell. She answered honestly this time too. It was the answer that he wanted to hear, but Eligor felt pain for some reason. It felt like she was saying that he didn't do anything to contribute. Eligor and Ophelia arrived at his second shrine, which was the cafeteria. His first shrine was obviously the torture room. While maintaining his smile, Eligor asked Ophelia again, do you think the dungeon is lacking, or is there something that should be added? Please be straightforward. Even though Eligor worked as the House of Mammon's butler for a long time, the dungeon that the previous two owners took care of was really small. As the female owner of the pub, he was sure that Ophelia would notice something that he missed. Ophelia's expression softened a little bit after seeing Eligor's sincere attitude. She spoke with a small smile on her face. It's missing an entertainment facility. Entertainment facility. I was going to tell the master myself, but it wasn't the right time to bring it up. The enemy wasn't going to attack right now. There was just a high possibility that the enemy would make their move in a few days, and on top of that, they were targeting the House of Foras, not the House of Mammon, and there was a good chance that the House of Foras might do well in defending against the enemy. Still, they couldn't help but think seriously about the current situation. Ophelia continued talking. This might sound funny, but spirits also have desires as well. They get stressed as well. If their desires aren't satisfied and they can't relieve their stress, they'll lose the will to fight. They won't be very efficient when working in the dungeon. Are you saying that we need to build a pub or something within the dungeon? That's a required facility. The owner from 2 generations ago built a pub fac. It must have been taken down before you joined, Eligor answered with a bittersweet smile. Ophelia shrugged her shoulders. Having a gambling facility would be good too. It's also a great method to collect the spirit's monthly pay. They should win the jackpot once in a while, but you understand, right? In the end, the gambling system is set up so that the house wins. She had an evil smile after saying that. It was natural for her to say something like that, since she was the owner of the largest gambling house in the Free City. Eligor wanted to remind her that she was a spirit as well, but spoke after clearing his throat. I'll recommend it to the master. I'll do it. I'm thinking about leaving tomorrow anyways. Also, the biggest flaw is you, Eligor. Ophelia said it so naturally, and because of that, Eligor didn't understand what Ophelia was saying. He blinked his eyes a few minutes after she said it. The dungeon was close to completely fall. No, I acknowledge the fact that you were able to keep the dungeon together and prevented it from completely falling, but how should I say this? You were more than enough for this dungeon up until now. You are definitely an amazing butler, but not for the House of Mammon's future. You're too weak. Eligor was really close to objecting and ended up flinching after hearing Ophelia's last comment. The words that he prepared disappeared from his thoughts. As you know, butlers are supposed to take care of everything within the dungeon. It's safe to say that they're the second most important figure, and that's why doing simple tasks isn't enough. Butlers don't have to be the second strongest being within the dungeon, but they do need a power that fits their position. Butlers are the last line of defense when it comes to dungeon defense. Especially during a time like this, Eligor couldn't say anything this time too. What Ophelia said was true. Most of the dungeon butlers were pretty powerful. Eligor recalled the fight with Foras in his head. Eligor couldn't do anything during that fight. Ophelia smiled brightly. She patted Eligor's weak shoulders. But don't worry, I'm here now. There was a lot of meaning behind that comment. Eligor's eyes were moving side to side, and Ophelia looked straight into his eyes. It probably won't happen right now, but if the House of Mammon becomes bigger and it ends up affecting the Free City, then I'll have to close the pub and join the House of Mammon. I'll be the butler when that time comes, so you don't have to overwork yourself. Ophelia stood up from her seat. She spoke after lightly patting Eligor's shoulder again. You did well so far. Please hang in a bit longer. After saying those nasty comments, Ophelia turned around. She walked towards the exit while wagging her red tail. This should be enough, right? You're a cruel owner. Her first mission within the dungeon was to play the role of a villain. Yong-ho didn't provide details on how she should do it. He just asked her to provoke Eligor a bit. Like Yong-ho had assumed, red demons were a fighting race. Because of that, Ophelia believed that Eligor wasn't going to stay depressed for a long time. Even though he's old and has a gentle personality, he can't hide the fact that he's a red demon. On top of that, Yong-ho had the power of evolution. Is there someone that would easily fall into depression after witnessing several extraordinary miracles? Show us the same willingness that helped you protect the dungeon that was falling apart. I have high expectations. Before leaving the restaurant, she slightly glanced over at Eligor and giggled like a brat that night. The basic training ground now belonged to the House of Mammon, and a red smoke filled the room. It filled the room until the sun came up. Chapter 65. Dungeon Offense. 1. Yong-ho woke up earlier than usual. It wasn't because he was worried about the things that could happen. Master, please hurry to the training ground. Eligor is dying. Lucia's scream woke Yong-ho up, and he exited the room without washing up. While rushing out, Lucia continued talking to him. Of course, he won't really die, but he went over his limit, so his body isn't in a normal condition. He really spent all night hitting the puppet in the training ground. When considering the current time, it meant that he's been hitting the puppet for 8 hours straight. Of course, a person doesn't die from exercising for 8 hours. On top of that, Eligor was a demon, and he even evolved Eligor's stamina. Please take what I said literally. I'm sure he didn't rest even for a second. It wasn't like Lucia watched Eligor's almost suicidal training from beginning to end. But she knew that Eligor was a red demon. Lucia knew about Eligor just as much as Catalina knew about him. Yong-ho gritted his teeth while running towards the training ground. Yong-ho was the one that asked Ophelia to provoke Eligor a bit, and when he heard that Eligor sneaked into the training ground from Lucia, he was happy that his plan worked. Yong-ho didn't think that a stiff butler like him would abuse himself like this. What the heck did Ophelia say to him? Didn't she report that everything went well yesterday? It did work out well. The problem was that it worked out too well. When Yong-ho arrived at the training ground, he opened the door without stopping to catch his breath. And he was so surprised by the red smoke that filled the room that he stopped breathing for a moment. Eligor was the source of the red smoke. Even in this moment, Eligor was punching the puppet, and a large amount of sweat was rolling down and smoke was rising out of his body. It reminded him of a sauna. He's been training to the point that heat was rising out of his body. Yong-ho stopped after shaking his head. Eligor was a demon. It's possible that it's in the nature of a red demon to act that way. His sweat isn't evaporating. It's a special type of steam that red demons release during battle. Master, please stop him. Eligor, Yong-ho shouted before Lucia finished her sentence. The voice belonged to his master, so Eligor stopped beating the puppet that he was beating all night long. He retracted the fist that was about to hit the puppet and turned around. Master. However, he looked like he was kind of out of it. Both of his fists were in really bad condition, and the puppet was covered in Eligor's blood. For red demons, Berserk is activated when they're really focused during battle, and I believe he was influenced by that. Berserk was the red demon's special characteristic. They weren't called a fighting race for nothing. Yong-ho spoke as calmly as he could. Eligor, are you okay? Do you recognize me? Can you move your body? Eligor answered all of his questions, and he must have come back to his senses because his eyes lit up again. But then a painful expression appeared on his face, and his body fell to the ground. He must have felt the physical pain that he wasn't able to feel when Berserk was activated. Thankfully, it's nothing serious. Eligor, sit down. Do you want some water? Thank you. It sounded like he forced himself to answer. Yong-ho quickly grabbed the water bottle that was on his waist and gave it to Eligor. When he noticed how much Eligor's arms were shaking, Yong-ho opened the lid and poured the water into Eligor's mouth. Sorry, why no, it's fine. Just drink more water. Eligor felt shameful. He was embarrassed by the fact that he couldn't control himself, and having his master feed him water was agonizing, but that was his own opinion of himself. This wasn't the first time Eligor thought he needed to get stronger. He had been thinking about it ever since he became the House of Mammon's official spirit. Was he suddenly using all of his energy in his training because Ophelia provoked him? There was a way, the power of evolution. Yong-ho's power developed a spirit based on the information that it displayed. He needed to fill the development rate, so that's why he was beating the puppet all night long. That was an embarrassment. The thought of deciding to rely on his master's power. During the past 10 years, he made excuses and was always lazy about putting in the effort in getting stronger. Despite witnessing Yong-ho's power several times before Ophelia provoked him, he didn't think he would ever act like this. He might have focused hard on hitting the puppet because of the embarrassment he felt Yong-ho couldn't read Eligor's thoughts. But as the master and spirit, they had a connection. Yong-ho was able to get an idea of what Eligor was feeling. Yong-ho wanted to tell him that he was wrong. They discovered the training ground yesterday, and all this time, Eligor did well as the butler. It was safe to say that he was doing the housekeeping by himself. Yong-ho opened his mouth to talk, but what he said was pretty random. You're manly, Eligor, stubbornness and childishness. Hasty. Eligor's face turned red due to the embarrassment he felt again. Even though his skin was red, it was still noticeable. Instead of saying anything more, Yong-ho activated the power of evolution. His efforts didn't go to waste. He managed to fill the development rate overnight. Of course, the more Eligor develops, the more difficult it'll be for him to fill the development rate in the future. This training method won't work in the future. Is it possible? When green flames rose out of Yong-ho's eyes, Eligor carefully asked, and then he felt embarrassed again. It's because it felt like he shamelessly asked his master to use their skill. But Yong-ho didn't mind it. He placed his hand on Eligor's shoulder and smiled. It's possible. It'll increase your rank instead of developing your strength or stamina. Close your eyes and relax. Eligor followed his instruction. Yong-ho poured out his mana without any hesitation. He did have to use a lot more mana than he had expected, but he didn't think it was a waste. Name: Eligor M. Race. Raid Demon, Beast Class, Spirit Mid-Rank. Elements: Fire Level 1, Darkness Level 1. Individual Nature: Diligent, Upright, Loyal. Individual Stat: Stamina, Development Rate 011 Erd. All of his skills increased. On top of that, his skills weren't the only things that changed. Wow, he wasn't called a beast for nothing. Eligor's body was already strong thanks to his stamina, but now he was really like a beast. Since he was shirtless, the change was more noticeable. His upper body was filled with muscles, causing it to look like an inverted triangle, and there was hair all over his chest and arms. The wrinkles on his face decreased, which made him look younger than before. Rejuvenation was Eligor old to begin with? Or did his physical appearance change like the time when Salami evolved? Yong-ho smiled as he thought about the random memory, beastly man. That was the perfect description. Eligor reminded him of Hugh Jackman when he played Wolverine. On top of that, he had a beard, so Eligor resembled Wolverine even more. Energy is overflowing within my body. He must have felt extremely excited because Eligor's voice started shaking. Because his rank increased, the injuries on his body were all healed. Yong-ho also felt himself getting stronger. Since Yong-ho was getting stronger day by day, he didn't feel a big difference, but he did get stronger. When a spirit becomes stronger, the owner becomes stronger as well. When the owner becomes stronger, the spirits become stronger as well. Eligor became stronger, and he was going to get stronger from now on. Shall we go back? We need to surprise everyone. Especially Ophelia. Eligor smiled at Yong-ho's comment. Instead of his usual warm smile, a confident smile appeared on Eligor's face. His neat black butler suit couldn't hide the change. The spirits that were gathered in the cafeteria widened their eyes and looked at Eligor when he was walking between the kitchen and cafeteria. Catalina, who had been with Eligor since his older days, was really surprised. Catalina kept on opening and closing her mouth like a goldfish and then looked at Yong-ho. Rickham and the orc soldiers looked at Yong-ho with sparkling eyes. Yong-ho had a satisfied smile on his face. Just yesterday, he was really worried because of what was happening in the empty regions, but right now, he was waiting for Ophelia to enter the cafeteria. And then, Ophelia appeared. "Hello, sir." As soon as she entered, she first showed her respect to Yong-ho and sat in the seat she was assigned to, and then she tilted her head when she noticed the other spirits acting oddly. What's wrong with everyone? The orcs are acting the weirdest. From her past experience, it was very rare to see orcs with sparkling eyes. It only happens when they're eating something really delicious, when there's a woman in front of them, or when they're feeling envious. Hehe. Ophelia flinched when she heard someone giggle, so she turned her head. When Catalina noticed that she giggled, she quickly closed her mouth and acted like a cold female warrior. But she couldn't stop herself from smiling. So silly. Ophelia lifted her head while thinking that maybe Yong-ho should have replaced the personal guard first, instead of the butler. She looked at the man that approached her. Like the other spirits, Ophelia's eyes widened as well, and after blinking a few times, her jaw dropped. Ophelia, flies will fly into your mouth. But there aren't any flies here since I'm responsible for this area. Eligor placed a plate full of food in front of Ophelia and casually turned around. Ophelia's eyes saw Eligor's beast-like back. Yong-ho tried his best to hold in his laughter. Eligor was definitely a man. Even if he was old, he was still a childlike man. Ophelia came back to her senses after staring at Eligor's back. It seemed like she was going to compliment him, but she quickly shut her mouth and looked at Yong-ho. Ophelia was requesting for an explanation, but Yong-ho wanted to enjoy this moment a bit longer. It was for his mental health, as well as for Eligor's. "Let's eat." Yong-ho spoke while raising a fork, and the spirits started eating their food. All this time, Ophelia couldn't really tell what she was eating. She was busy glancing over at Eligor, who had a beast-like body and a warm smile. "Your powers are amazing, sir." "No, amazing isn't enough to describe your power." After enjoying the small break they had after eating, Yong-ho and Ophelia walked towards the dungeon entrance room. After thanking Yong-ho for walking her to the entrance, she praised Yong-ho's power. Yong-ho had a satisfied smile. He spoke in a slightly modest tone. It's nothing compared to the potential you brought out of Eligor. The power of evolution didn't have the power to create something out of nothing. It helped bring out the hidden potential that one had. The hidden potential that was marked in each of the development routes was proof. However, it was still true that Yonghos's power of evolution was an amazing skill. Ophelia spoke while smiling warmly. My father was correct. The House of Mammon will definitely rise again. The chaos was scary and violent, but she wasn't worried. Ophelia now truly believed that the House of Mammon was going to rise again. I look forward to working with you. Of course, sir. I will serve you and the House of Mammon with everything that I have. When the owner and the spirit happily finished their conversation, Yongho discreetly signaled Eligor with his eyes. Eligor, who had been standing next to Yongho, said goodbye to Ophelia. Goodbye. You do know that you're still lacking, right? I will continue improving myself. When Ophelia jokingly made that comment, Eligor spoke seriously with a calm expression. Ophelia smiled once again at his reply. As someone that acknowledged his willingness before, she spoke to her fellow Red Demon. Okay, I'll be waiting for our next meeting, Brother Eligor. Well, Eligor had the same expression as Ophelia when she was in the cafeteria, and he even stuttered. Ophelia looked back at Yongho with a satisfied smile. She showed respect to Yongho, who had a bright smile on his face. Ophelia, the daughter of Endelion, will now leave. Right, see you next time. Catalina also had a blank expression, and after saying goodbye with her eyes, Ophelia looked at Eligor one last time. Eligor was still spaced out, and after winking at him, Ophelia turned around. Her red tail was gently swinging back and forth. She called you Brother Lucky Guy. Yongho turned around, and Catalina came back to her senses and quickly followed behind him. Even during that time, Eligor kept on blinking his eyes. He was sure that he was the first one that attacked, but in the end, it felt like he was the one that got hit. How would he describe this? Not bad. A warm smile appeared on Eligor's face. He turned around and walked back as the butler of the dungeon. He was slightly looking forward to the day when Ophelia would visit again. And a day later, Eligor's expectation backfired. Chapter 66, Dungeon Offense 2. It was safe to say that Ophelia's second visit was unexpected. Between the House of Mammon and the Free City, it took more than a day on horse, but it only took Ophelia a day to come back. Unless she really pushed her horse, she probably changed directions before arriving at the Free City and returned to the House of Mammon. Ophelia was a mess, and that was more than enough to explain how violent the ride back was. Her light blonde hair was covered in dust, and her neat and tidy clothes were messy. Ophelia's horse was covered in sweat, and as soon as they arrived at the dungeon entrance, they collapsed to the ground. Ophelia entered the House of Mammon without taking care of her horse. Yongho was exploring the dungeon with the spirits, and it didn't take him long to reach the dungeon entrance. However, 10 minutes felt like an eternity for Ophelia. What's wrong? Yongho asked directly when he arrived. He was curious as to why she returned so quickly, and why she came here instead of using the communication device. All of those thoughts were condensed into that one question, and after hearing it, Ophelia collected her breath. She assumed that he would have a lot of questions, but answering each and every one wasn't important right now. Ophelia didn't even greet him properly. The House of Forres surrendered to the House of Abigail. He stopped breathing for a moment. Silence filled the room when the spirits heard what Ophelia said. They abandoned the dungeon and surrendered. Through that, they're able to avoid death. It was a reasonable choice. The House of Forres lost a reliable owner. The orcs were the main combat group, and they lost them, and the anxious spirits started leaving one by one. It might have turned out differently if the situation was calm, but things were chaotic. It wouldn't be weird if another dungeon combat happened. Yongho gritted his teeth. There was one possibility he didn't think about. The House of Forres was the enemy's stepping stone, not a shield. It's safe to say that it's rare for an owner to give up a dungeon and surrender without a fight. Please don't blame yourself. Even the spirits didn't think that the House of Forres would surrender so easily, and the conditions weren't good enough to attack the dungeon. It can't be helped. Lucia spoke gently, as if to comfort him. Yongho closed his eyes and breathed in deeply. He wasn't trying to rely on Lucia and make himself feel better. He was trying to determine what was important right now. What's the current situation of the surrender? Is the House of Forers under the House of Abigail's control, and how did they surrender? It was safe to say that the moment the House of Forers surrendered, it belonged to the House of Abigail. What Yong-ho wanted to know was when the House of Forers surrendered to them, and how they surrendered was important as well. Owners fight over dungeons in order to steal the owner's spirit. The owner's spirit, the mana that was built up within the heart of the dungeon. Yong-ho could have preserved the dungeon and used it as a second dungeon. It could be used as a branch office or to expand the dungeon. Ophelia kept on gulping. She had a hard time talking because she was sweating so much. Her voice cracked as she spoke. Out of the spirits that left the House of Forers, some of them didn't actually leave. It was a way to hide the fact that they surrendered. Yong-ho recalled the report that he heard from Ophelia about the spirits that either went to the Free City or joined a different dungeon after leaving the House of Forers. And out of those that left, the spirits that joined the House of Abigail didn't join because they wanted to. It's because they surrendered to them. It's been a few days since the House of Forers told them that they wanted to surrender, and worst of all, during the few days that I visited the House of Mammon, Young Cheros, the owner of the House of Abigail, left the dungeon. Is it to accept the House of Forers? Eligor couldn't contain his curiosity and asked. Ophelia nodded her head. While returning to the Free City, my subordinate quickly notified me. Young Cheros should have arrived at the House of Forres dungeon by now. The House of Forres already fell into the House of Abigail's hand. Yong-ho didn't even get the chance to stop them. Yong-ho was thinking. He asked for more information before becoming discouraged. Did the House of Abigail's owner visit the House of Forers in order to register the heart of the dungeon? I can't say for sure. They could be visiting in order to register the successor of the House of the Forers as their own spirit, however. Ophelia suddenly stopped talking and bit her lips. She hesitated and then spoke again. Personally, I think they're visiting in order to absorb the dungeon's spirit. The owner of the House of Mammon, the Demon of Fire, isn't an easy opponent. Instead of using the dungeon to advance, there's a high chance that they're choosing to completely get rid of all fights. The owners near the Free City get their sources from the pub. Yong-ho was known as the Demon of Fire, thanks to Ophelia's database, and he was known to be a tough opponent. Forres was known to be strong despite their old age, but Yong-ho managed to defeat them, and he even took down a landworm. Different thoughts popped into Yong-ho's head. He gulped. He calmed himself down by thinking deeply. If what Ophelia said was true, there was a low chance that another dungeon combat was going to occur soon. If Abigail leaves after breaking the House of Forers, then there wouldn't be any other dungeons around the House of Mammon. But he couldn't relax. There was still the possibility of Abigail using the House of Forers as an advancement base to invade the House of Mammon. I won't be able to find an answer soon. The answer won't reveal itself just because he was being impatient about it. After feeling calm, Yong-ho tried to calm down the spirits. He also didn't forget to credit Ophelia's effort for rushing back here. But before he could talk about them, a new issue came up. A group of orcs are quickly running towards here from the House of Forres. According to the dungeon meerkats, they're all riding horses. Is the enemy planning on attacking us? Eligor spoke in a surprised tone. Rikum quickly shook his head. A dungeon can't be invaded with a few orcs, master. Are you able to provide detailed information regarding the orcs that are approaching? Yong-ho was just as surprised as Eligor, and he managed to calm down when he heard Rickum's voice. When he lightly waved his finger, Lucia replied, "To raise a total of 4 orcs. The orc that's leading them is wearing a piece of white fabric on their back. Letters of light were drawn in the air so that the spirits could see it as well." Rickum's face started glowing. "I'm sure they're the orcs that remained in the House of Forers, and they're coming here to surrender." Ophelia nodded her head. "I made sure that the news of Rickum surrendering to the House of Mammon was being spread discreetly. They could be coming here after hearing that their captain was here." Catalina looked back at Yong-ho with a hopeful expression. It was good news. The value of the orcs that left the House of Forres was displayed. Yong-ho had enough evidence to assume what was going on at the House of Forres and what Abigail was going to do. Lucia opened the dungeon door. "We'll greet them at the dungeon entrance." After ordering Lucia, Yong-ho looked back at the spirits. Catalina and Skull nodded their heads, and Rickum and Ophelia followed Yong-ho. Catalina, a dungeon meerkat, raised their voice while pointing at the orcs that were approaching. After patting the dungeon meerkat's head, Yong-ho waited for the orcs to arrive. Raccoon spoke energetically. "I'm sure they were my subordinates." It looked like the orcs recognized Raccoon. Despite the fact that they were still far from the dungeon, Catalina noticed that their faces were mixed with anxiety, relief, and happiness. "Captain Rickham." As soon as they arrived, one of the orcs immediately jumped off their horse and yelled. The orcs that arrived after them did the same. Rickham spoke with a stern voice. "You're in front of the master. Show your respect first." The orcs already knew that Rickham became the House of Mammon's spirit, so they acted pretty quickly. Yong-ho wasn't sure if they did it because of the current situation, or because they confirmed that Rickham actually surrendered, but they kneeled in front of Yong-ho without any hesitation. "It is an honor to meet you, owner of the House of Mammon." Yong-ho couldn't feel the special manner that spirits had from the orcs. It's probably because their contract with the House of Foras ended. Yong-ho spoke as calmly as possible. "I'm glad you're here. Did you work under Rickham?" "Yes, we worked under Captain Rickham." The orc that had a white flag on their back answered for the rest of the group. Rickham stepped in to get rid of Yong-ho's curiosity. "What happened? Is it true that the House of Foras surrendered to the House of Abigail?" Everyone focused on the orc-even skull, looked at the orc while holding their battle hammer instead of rolling around on the ground. The orc was nervous due to the attention they were getting, but they spoke. The words that came out of the orc's mouth was something that Yong-ho and even Ophelia wasn't expecting. "The owner of the House of Foras." The young owner was killed by Yung Sheros, and Yung Sheros is currently trapped in the House of Foras dungeon. There was a need for an explanation. There were too many unanswered questions to accept it as is the successor of the House of Foras died. It was possible. The enemy could have pretended to accept the surrender and ended up killing the successor. This happened in both the demon world and the human world, but it was difficult to understand the part about Yung Sheros being trapped inside the House of Foras dungeon. Rickham urged the orc to explain, and they started providing information about the things they knew. The young owner. "No, I believe that the owner of the House of Foras wasn't able to protect the dungeon." The butler agreed as well. There were barely any fighting spirits, and one by one, they started running away. It was something Yong-ho expected. Instead of pressing them for more information, he waited patiently. The orc glanced at Yong-ho and then continued talking. "There weren't that many to choose from. As the owner, the enemy. Since the owner of the House of Mammon was considered an enemy, they couldn't surrender to you. So that's why they decided to surrender to Yung Sheros, the owner of the House of Abigail. They asked to get revenge on the House of Mammon in exchange for the surrender. But Yung Sheros wasn't planning on doing it. After pretending to accept the surrender, they were planning on visiting the House of Foras dungeon, kill the owner, and destroy the heart of the dungeon, because all they need to do is absorb the spirit," Ophelia explained, and the orc nodded their head with a surprised look on their face. Yung Sheros brought guards and elite soldiers with them. As soon as they finished registering Foras spirit, they showed their true face. But the butler didn't stand by and just watch. Eligor flinched when he heard the word butler. The orcs spoke while tightening their fist. The butler was suspicious of Yung Sheros from the start, so they built a trap just in case. Yung Sheros targeted the heart of the dungeon after killing the owner, but it was useless. The room that the butler made Yung Sheros enter contained a fake heart of the dungeon. The butler closed the dungeon. When Yong-ho asked, Lucia quickly replied, "When the owner dies, the spirit of the dungeon dies as well." But for the House of Mammon, even if the spirit of the dungeon dies, it doesn't mean that the facilities within the dungeon will stop working. They'll start using the mana that was stored and will experience a slow death. The butler of the House of Foras probably chose to have a quick death rather than a slow death. They probably closed the dungeon door by pouring the remaining mana into the dungeon trap. Since they used up a lot of the mana, the dungeon will die faster, but it can trap the enemy that entered the dungeon. Instead of letting the dungeon die, the butler used it on the final attack. The other orcs and I escaped the dungeon through a secret passageway, but Yung Sheros is probably still stuck in the deepest part of the dungeon. The room that the butler led them to was a fake throne room, and they had traps installed all around the room. Yong-ho organized the situation once more. The successor of the House of Foras died Yung Sheros, the owner of the House of Abigail, is trapped inside Foras dungeon. Junkeros doesn't know the layout of Foras dungeon, and the traps that were installed were dangerous to them. Of course, the traps were dangerous to Yong-ho as well, but Yong-ho knew the layout of the House of Foras. The spirits that knew the layout were working under him. How many soldiers did Junkeros bring with them? Ophelia caught a glimpse of something when Yong-ho asked. The orc blinked, then counted with their fingers and then answered. They brought around 20 guards with them. Some of the guards probably died from the traps through. Yong-ho calculated in his head. Greed raised their voice. If everything they said were true, dungeon fight. It was time to attack. Chapter 67. Dungeon Offense 3. The conversation was moving at a fast pace. Catalina kept on licking her lips and in the end looked at Yong-ho while biting her lips. Catalina was able to understand the context of the conversation. If everything that the orc said was true, then Yong-ho had to make a move. The information was that valuable. But if what they said wasn't true? If this was a well-thought-out trap, Catalina didn't know the successor of the House of Foras. Were they that stupid that they would let a tiger come into their house just so they can bring their enemy down? Was Junkeros really that sneaky and evil that they would kill someone that surrendered without any hesitation? Catalina couldn't find the answer. Despite of that, Catalina remained quiet because she trusted Yong-ho. Yong-ho probably thought about the same things. In that case, how was he going to determine whether what they said was true? Catalina's expectations weren't wrong. Yong-ho soon found a solution. Ophelia. Yes, sir. Ophelia immediately answered when Yong-ho called her. Even though Yong-ho gives his orders, Ophelia looked like she knew what she had to do. Ophelia waited for Yong-ho's order. Just like Catalina, Yong-ho didn't disappoint Ophelia. Can you reenact the event that happened at the bar? I do need some time to prepare, but it's possible. I'll check to see if it's true or not. The orcs were confused by their conversation since no one explained to them about what was going on. Rickham was surprised, so he asked Ophelia, "Are you saying that you're going to look into their minds because we can't trust them? Don't you think it's unreasonable to trust them just because they worked under you before?" Ophelia was straightforward, and Rickham gritted his teeth because he felt that she was doubting him, but it only lasted for a moment. Rickham was the type of quickly make a decision, so he nodded his head. "Well, you're right. Please forgive my behavior, sir." After Rickham finished talking, he nodded towards Yong-ho and took a step back. The orc that was talking while kneeling in front of Yong-ho looked at Rickham with a confused expression. Captain, it's nothing. We're just testing to see whether the information provided is true. Nothing bad will happen to you, so trust me and stay still." When the orc heard Rickham's calm voice, they gulped and then nodded their head. They looked nervous because of the sweat on their face, but it didn't look like they were worried about getting caught lying. Yong-ho didn't judge right away. Since he decided to leave it to Ophelia, he was going to wait until she had the results. Ophelia took out a white chalk from the inner pocket of her vest and started drawing a magic circle on the ground. The circle was drawn with the orc in the center, but a similar circle was at the bar as well. However, Yong-ho didn't notice. Ophelia needed to really prepare when looking into the mind of a demon like Yong-ho, but this time she was looking into the mind of a naive orc. After spending 5 minutes drawing the circle, she straightened her back and stood up. "I'll begin." Yong-ho lightly nodded his head and agreed. The orcs had a worried look since they didn't know what was happening, so they kept on looking at Ophelia, and the orc Rickham prepared himself in case something happened. Catalina recalled what happened at the bar, so she stared at Ophelia's lips. Ophelia lowered herself so that her eyes were on the same level as the orcs. She looked straight into their eyes and spoke, "Consider yourself lucky." The orc tried to blink because they were confused, but they couldn't. Their eyelids were fixed. The orc looked at Ophelia with a blank expression, and Ophelia looked into the orc's eyes again. She slowly closed the distance between her and the orc, and right when their noses were touching, Eligor widened his eyes due to the surprise, and Catalina ended up looking back at Yong-ho. While looking downward, Yong-ho waited for Ophelia to talk. The contact only lasted for a moment. After standing up, Ophelia took out a handkerchief, and after wiping her lips, she looked back at Yong-ho. The orc still had a blank expression and was spacing out. It's true that Orc Gokhan witnessed the butler of the House of Foras being killed by Junkeros. Rickham released a sigh of relief and Yong Ho closed his eyes. What Yong Ho needed to do was quickly make a decision. It's impossible to attack the house of Abigail first. It was far. On top of that, Abigail didn't take all of their guards. Yong Ho was afraid of attacking the house of Forres, so it didn't make sense for him to attack the house of Abigail just because the owner was missing. Should I attack the house of Forres or not? There were definitely geometrically benefits. If Yong Ho considered the possibility of Yongcheros group suffering from the traps, then he wouldn't have an issue in terms of numbers. But it was definitely dangerous. The house of Forres was the enemy's territory, and it was hard to tell what Yongcheros and their soldiers were capable of. If they make a mistake, they could actually lose to Yongcheros and lose their lives. But even though it was dangerous, they could gain a lot from it. With one fight, Yong Ho will be able to absorb not only Yongcheros and the successor's spirit, but also obtain the House of Forres heart of the dungeon. The remaining inheritance was just a bonus. What he needed was information. And when it came to obtaining information, Yong Ho was ahead of the owners that were near the free city. Ophelia, how strong is Yongcheros? Do you know anything about the guards and the spirits that they have? Ophelia, a spirit of the House of Mammon and the owner of the bar, quickly replied as if she had already prepared for it. Yongcheros isn't a melee fighter like Forres, but since they're pretty big and strong, there's a possibility that they'll win at hand-to-hand combat. Even though there isn't a lot of information about them, there's a high chance they play a non-combat role. Yong Ho's power of evolution was also a non-combat power. There wasn't a rule that said that all demons had offensive powers like Forres. In the empty southern regions, the owners rarely started dungeon fights. Information about the owners' powers were limited, but information about their soldiers and spirits weren't very limited. Yongcheros guard is an ogre, and they're just like my owner. Even though they're naive, their strength and stamina are outstanding. They even fought against a group of orcs at once and won. What about when compared to you? I'm stronger. Even though it was sort of a childish reply, Ophelia's eyes didn't show a hint of arrogance. Her calm eyes were filled with nothing but the truth. Ophelia continued explaining. The spirits that they mainly purchase from the dungeon shop are the living armors. Gokhan witnessed Yongcheros being accompanied by a group of living armors, right? Ophelia looked back at Gokhan, and Gokhan was suddenly surprised, causing them to quickly nod their head. That's right, I saw them with my own two eyes. A living armor was a spirit that Yong Ho has never encountered before. He's never seen it in the dungeon shop catalog. Either Rikum helped Yong Ho. Since living armors aren't living things, they don't feel any pain, and on top of that, they're immune to sword attacks. However, if we were to use a blunt weapon, we'll have a chance when fighting them. If their armor breaks, they'll be unable to fight, even if they're a living armor. Skull swung their weapon when they heard blunt weapon. Yong Ho started thinking again. He compared the number of soldiers he could take with him and the number of soldiers that Yongcheros possessed. Nothing was set when it came to battles. If it did exist, then Yong Ho wouldn't have been able to defeat Forres. High risk, high return, greed reminded him. It guided Yong Ho. Let's prepare for battle. Well, form a group and attack the house of Forres. Yong Ho quickly spoke. He turned to Eligor. Eligor, defend the dungeon with Trient. I'm going to attack the dungeon with Catalina, Skull, Salami, Ophelia, Rikum, and the orcs. Eligor hesitated for a moment. He had many different thoughts during the short time, but it was already decided. Eligor fixed his posture and showed his respect towards Yong Ho. The butler, Eligor, will wait for you to return, sir. Catalina and Skull were already prepared. Rikum spoke after quickly showing respect towards Yong Ho. He'll round them up within 10 minutes. Yong Ho didn't rush into registering the orcs as spirits. Yong Ho waved his finger and asked Lucia to summon Salami. After selling the war carriages to the dungeon shop, Yong Ho had 2 left. It was enough to carry the soldiers. The important thing was time. Before the data fell into the hands of another, he had to quickly resolve this situation. Ophelia spoke as if she read Yong Ho's mind. Yongcheros is impatient and hot-headed. It's safe to say that they probably won't wait patiently until the mana in the dungeon runs out. I'm sure they're moving to find the heart of the dungeon, and the damage they receive from the traps will only increase. If Yongcheros left after finding the heart of the dungeon, then Yong Ho would be placed in a difficult situation. Yong Ho calmed himself again. Greed also asked him to calm down instead of pushing him. In order to gain something big, one needs to be patient at times. Yong-ho tightened his grip around Armin. Yong-ho looked towards the north. That's where the House of Foraz was located. The carriage moved as fast as it could. It used the mana that was stored within the carriage, and it didn't care that the horses were tired. It wasn't a proper operation. If the carriage operated this way, then its functions will stop right when they reach their destination. But they still had to use it that way. Yong-ho looked out the carriage window and saw Salami flying ahead with Catalina on their back. He focused on the conversation they were having inside the carriage. On a large piece of paper, Rickham drew a map of the House of Foras dungeon. Even though he was relying on his memories, he served under Foras for many years, so he barely made any mistakes. Gokhan and the other orcs pointed out the things that changed after the dungeon got a new owner, but since the owner didn't last a long time, there weren't any big changes. The House of Foras had a lot of secret passageways. The reason why Foras used Wallbreak to attack Yong-ho's weak point was because Foras had contemplated a lot about Wallbreak. From the outside, it looked like large passageways were connected to each other, but there were many hidden passageways. The deeper part of the dungeon had more narrow passageways. This is where Junkeros was at last, and we don't really know where the real heart of the dungeon is located. Gokhan spoke while scratching his head. Rickham asked Gokhan, "Did all the spirits escape the dungeon? There aren't any spirits that were captured by Junkeros and is guiding them through the dungeon." I can't say for sure, but most of them did escape Junkeros, and the owner of the spirits couldn't get close to their rendezvous point. Gokhan didn't know where the real heart of the dungeon was located, but Rickham pointed to one area on the map and spoke. It was a room that was far from the room where Junkeros was trapped in. I can't guarantee it, but there's a high chance that the heart of the dungeon is located in this area. The saying, "the beacon does not shine on its own base," exists for a reason when considering the butler's personality. They most likely placed it far from Junkeros. After nodding his head, Yong-ho looked closely at the dungeon map. Even though he had the orcs to guide him, he couldn't completely rely on them. Memorizing the map was the best thing to do. The carriage increased its speed. After memorizing the dungeon map, Yong-ho closed his eyes and thought about the infiltration. The first thing he had to do after entering the House of Foras dungeon. Time flew by. The two war carriages arrived at the House of Foras dungeon. Chapter 68. Dungeon Offense. 4. The shape of Foras dungeon entrance and the House of Mammon's dungeon entrance was different. For the House of Mammon, a large door was attached at the bottom of the hill, but for the House of Mammon, a castle gate was attached. A fortress was created by piling stones, and the dungeon itself must have been located underground, because from the outside, the castle gate was the only thing standing tall. The dungeon entrance was completely sealed. Junkeros' war carriage was still next to the door, so there was a high chance that Junkeros was trapped. Gokhan, who was leading the way, spoke. "There's a secret passageway that we used to escape this way." After placing the war carriages near the gate, Yong-ho followed Gokhan. There was a forest not too far from the gate, and a well with a cover was hidden between the grass. While Gokhan and the orcs were removing the cover, Rickham looked at Yong-ho. Like we've mentioned before, we're able to move to different parts of the dungeon through these secret passageways. The problem is that we don't know where Junkeros is right now. Is there an area you've thought of before coming here? Ophelia also looked curious. She had expectations, but it looked like she was also testing him. Yong-ho looked at both of them and spoke. "Well, go straight to the heart of the dungeon's room." Junkeros' final destination was the heart of the dungeon's room. Yong-ho wasn't sure where Junkeros was right now, but he was sure that they were going to eventually find the room. It was a reasonable decision, but Ophelia didn't understand it right away. Rickham spoke with a slightly awkward expression. "Well, there's a high chance that the area I mentioned is where the real one is located. I don't exactly know where the room is." Skull yelled to tell him not to worry, and Catalina had a small smile on her face. Catalina and Skull knew something that Ophelia and Rickham didn't know. It could be a superiority complex, or it could be that Catalina was just excited about Yong-ho's power. But she looked at Yong-ho with sparkling eyes, and Yong-ho patted her head. Ophelia and Rickham tilted their head in confusion, and Yong-ho spoke to them. "They'll find the way there, so don't worry. However, I don't think Salami will be able to fit in the narrow passageway, since it was a secret passageway, and Salami was larger than an ordinary horse, it was possible for them to fit. After Yong-ho commanded Salami to guard the passageway and the dungeon entrance, he turned back to Rickham. "Let's go." "Understood. I'll take the lead." Rickham knew that Yong-ho wasn't the type to make empty promises. Rickham didn't know how Yong-ho was going to find it, but he decided to trust him for now. Gokhan and the orcs followed Rickham and Yong-ho, and Catalina followed behind them. Skull and Ophelia entered the well after the remaining orcs entered. The passage that connected to the bottom of the well was filled with darkness. Rickham and the orcs took out the lighting rod that they prepared and lit the passage. Rickham stopped after walking a few hundred meters. It's because there was a crossroad. Up till now, they walked towards the direction where the heart of the dungeon's room could be located. However, it was difficult to tell which way was the right way. They had to find the correct path. After taking the lighting rod from Catalina, Yong-ho stood in front of Rickham. Instead of walking, he closed his eyes and breathed in deeply. What was the most valuable in the House of Four-Ass dungeon? What was the most valuable to Yong-ho? Greed's eyes opened within Yong-ho. They didn't hide their desire. An invisible energy started seeping out. The smoke-like energy were ripped into pieces, and some of those pieces enveloped Catalina. The small smokes enveloped Ophelia and Skull. As well, Yong-ho calmed their desire. He strongly reminded Greed of the thing he wanted right now. The pieces of smoke gathered and became one. The large, thick flow extended out to a specific location. Yong-ho opened his eyes. He followed Greed's guide. Rickham and Ophelia didn't see Yong-ho's greed, but they did feel that something was out of place. Ophelia was able to sense mana better than Rickham, and she unconsciously gulped. Even though they weren't in a dangerous situation, sweat rolled down her face. Greed Ophelia encountered Yong-ho's greed once. Their personality was different from back then, but she was sure that the energy that was seeping out of Yong-ho was greed. He walked confidently. Catalina and Skull followed behind without any hesitation. Yong-ho knew where the traps were located since he studied the map, so he didn't hesitate or stop once. How much did they walk? Yong-ho stopped. He placed his hand on an empty wall and forcefully released his mana. When a different mana collided with his, it released a sound. After a rattling sound filled the room, it revealed a secret door that was hidden within the wall. Rickham and the orcs looked at Yong-ho and the door as if they'd seen a ghost. Catalina was so excited that she couldn't hide the big smile that was on her face. Even though Ophelia was an information deal, she gulped due to the anxiety she was feeling. Everyone knew that each of the sins had their own special powers. In that case, was that Greed's special power, the power to guide the possessor's desire. It made sense. It was definitely a powerful skill. Greed's power didn't just stop there. A small smile appeared on Ophelia's face. Instead of looking back, Yong-ho continued walking towards the heart of the dungeon's room. The room was the most important and the least harmful room. Despite of being employed under the House of Four-Ass, the orcs have never seen the heart of the dungeon. The spirit of the dungeon must have died because the heart of the dungeon was reacting. It just looked like marble that was shining brightly. Yong-ho looked at the heart of the dungeon that was sitting on top of an altar. The dungeon's history was shorter than the House of Mammons, and despite of it developing more than Mammons, it wasn't as big as Yong-ho thought. Greed aggressively reacted. They complained to Yong-ho about how thirsty they were. It was a large amount of mana. It was stronger than any of the spirits he absorbed. Yong-ho agreed as well. He wanted to destroy the shield that was protecting the heart of the dungeon and absorb the spirit right now. But now wasn't the time. Now wasn't the time to use his mana to take the heart. The heart of the dungeon was safe. Yongcheros still wasn't able to escape the dungeon. If Yongcheros was far away, Yong-ho could take the heart and make the dungeon his. If Yongcheros was close, Yong-sho could use the map to his advantage and ambush them. The dungeon's interior was dark. Because of that, Yong-ho's hearing was more sensitive than when there was light. If Yongcheros is lost within the dungeon, and on top of that, if they were exploring every corner of the dungeon to find the heart of the dungeon boom. A boom could be heard beyond the darkness. It wasn't as loud, but he heard a scream as well. It mostly meant that a trap was activated. Even though Yong-ho wasn't skilled in analyzing these types of situations, he was able to tell how close the sound was. It wasn't that far. and Yongho's subordinates were able to discover a lot of information. I think I know where it's coming from. When Rickham spoke, Yongho nodded his head. It was time. Yongcheros, the owner of the House of Abigail, couldn't hide their anger. Everything that happened up to the point where he strangled the young successor to death was great. Even though they were still young and weak, they still had a strong spirit since they were the owner. But everything that happened after that was a mess. Despite of the fact that their father put his life on the line to protect the dungeon for many years, the young owner gave up the entire dungeon. However, the butler had a disapproving look on their face since day one, and in the end, the butler messed things up, almost a day. It was the amount of time that Yongcheros was trapped at the fake heart of the dungeon's room. When Yongcheros barely managed to break the magic seal, traps that were stacked on top of each other were waiting. It would take another day for them to break through the traps and search the dungeon. They didn't want to think about the number of spirits they've lost so far. Breaking that butler's neck wasn't enough to satisfy Yongcheros. Taking the heart of the dungeon wasn't satisfying enough. While grinding their teeth, Yongcheros couldn't contain their anger and ended up hitting a wall. Yongcheros was as big and strong as an ogre. So with one hit, it made the ceiling and walls shake. Useless pieces of shits. 2 living armors moved in order to break through the trap room, but when a giant weight fell from the ceiling, they were completely crushed. There were 15 living armors in the beginning, but there was only 7 left, and out of the 10 Gnoll soldiers, only 4 survived. But it was a relief that Yongcheros and Kun, an ogre warrior and Yongcheros guard, were still alive. The Gnoll soldiers flinched when Yongcheros expressed their anger. Out of the 6 soldiers that died, Yongcheros killed one of them, so it was natural for them to react that way. The lighting device wasn't enough to get rid of the dungeon's darkness, and this made Yongcheros even more angry. While breathing heavily, Yongcheros compared the worth between a living armor and one of their Gnoll soldiers. From now on, a soldier will take the lead, not a living armor. While violently waving the lighting device that was in their hand, Yongcheros looked back. The soldiers were behind them, and Yongcheros opened their mouth to yell at them to take the lead, but the thing that escaped their lips wasn't what they had originally thought. The number of Gnoll soldiers decreased. Yongcheros only saw 2 instead of 4. The soldiers looked at each other with a surprised look when they saw Yongcheros' shocked expression. 4 of them were here just now, but now it was just 2 of them. The other 2 that were with them disappeared. Those bastards ran away. Yongcheros approached the Gnoll soldiers while releasing an angry scream. One of them was so scared that they took a step back and they touched something that was hidden in the dark. The soldier instinctively used the lighting device to see what was beneath them. It was one of Yongcheros' Gnoll soldiers. Blood was seeping out of their neck and their mouth was wide open. And in that moment, a light appeared along with the boom. The flare only lasted for a moment, but everyone that was in the room covered their eyes. The things that happened in the dark were now happening in the light. Catalina used her dagger and cut a soldier's throat. Because of the strong light, Catalina's shadow mana wasn't as strong as earlier, but the attack was enough to kill a Gnoll soldier. Using the secret passageway that was in the ceiling, Ophelia jumped down and used her tail to strangle the other Gnoll soldier. On top of strangling them, Ophelia also broke their neck. The flare disappeared. Yongcheros managed to get their sight back, and all they saw were the corpses of their soldiers. Someone was here. Traps weren't the only things Yongcheros had to worry about now. Get ready to fight, protect the master. When Kun, Yongcheros' guard, yelled, the remaining living armors turned around and approached Yongcheros, and someone was hitting those living armors' backs with a hammer. The blunt warhammer signaled that the fight started. Scullel. The hammer hit the living armors' backs. Rickham and the other orcs smashed the living armors' backs with a blunt weapon. Even through the fight began, the living armors had a hard time turning the table because they lost the advantage. The defenders had the advantage when fighting in the dark. Because of that, it was common sense for the attackers to prepare lighting devices. Yongcheros did prepare lighting devices. However, most of their devices were taken because Yongcheros spent 2 days and had to deal with the traps that were installed within the dungeon. When the orcs suddenly invaded, Yongcheros recalled the remaining powers within the House of Foras. As an owner ruled a dungeon, instead of running away, Yongcheros screamed angrily while wielding their favorite sword. Idiots, Kun, kill them. Kun responded to Yongcheros' order. Kun screamed angrily towards the orcs while wielding a large, dangerous mace, and Ophelia discreetly approached behind Kun. When Kun sensed a presence behind him, he quickly turned around, but it was too late. Ophelia quickly ran up Kun's back and hit the back of his neck using her hand. Break away. After digging into Kun's neck using her hand, Ophelia jumped off of Kun's shoulder. Kun waved his arms despite of the pain and ended up collapsing on the ground. When Kun collapsed, Catalina appeared behind him. She pierced the back of his neck with a knife. Only a few seconds passed after that, but the next attack was deadly. Blood flooded out of Kun's neck and he fell back while releasing a pant. His body started shaking and he was unable to get up. Skull. The scream that was released behind Junkeros provoked them once again. When Junkeros saw Kun on the ground, they started panting. They saw blood on Ophelia's hands, and she was licking the blood off while wagging her tail. The owner of the pub. Why are you here? Instead of answering, Ophelia smiled brightly with blood all over her lips. Catalina was beside her and was wielding a dagger, and the darkness disappeared. The light was released from one of the lighting devices, and it revealed the room. Despite of being blinded by the flare, Juncheros was able to see the room. The skeleton and orcs were smashing the crushed living armors. The Knoll soldiers were lying on the ground and Kun was shaking on the ground. They weren't the House of Foras remaining soldiers. Did the female owner of the pub want a dungeon as well? If not that, the Demon King of Fire. Juncheros yelled when they noticed the last person to exiting out of the secret passageway, the House of Mammon's new owner, the Demon King of Fire that killed Foras and a landworm. Instead of answering, Yong-ho tightened his grip on Aemon. Ophelia and Catalina stood by his side, and Skull stood up while wielding the warhammer. Was the owner of the pub working with the House of Mammon? Did the House of Foras orcs guide Yong-ho Juncheros stop thinking about these questions? Instead of giving up or kneeling, they kicked off the ground and yelled, Kun, kill the enemy. It wasn't a simple order. It was a childish scream. Gaha! Kun, who was lying on the floor, stood up. He started running towards Yong-ho. It reminded Yong-ho of a dump truck. Juncheros' mana didn't only affect Kun, their mana dominated over the mind, so it slowed down Catalina and Ophelia. Skull, Skull yelled. Within that moment, Yong-ho kicked Ophelia and pushed her. He threw his body and covered Catalina, and he barely managed to dodge Kun. Kun wasn't able to control his own body, so he ended up charging into a wall. They must have been at their limit because they weren't moving. And Juncheros approached Yong-ho. Yong-ho barely managed to dodge the large sword that struck like lightning. Juncheros didn't pick up the sword. They used their hands and put pressure on both Yong-ho and Catalina. Juncheros looked straight at Yong-ho and activated their power, the Demon King of Control. That was Juncheros' nickname. They were able to dominate their opponent's mind and control their movements. Juncheros used their power to control the Demon King of Fire. That's how they were able to turn the tables. Juncheros laughed out loud. They poured all of their mana into their power in order to completely crush Yong-ho's resistance. But it was weird. The Demon King of Fire wasn't resisting at all. Yong-ho was actually accepting Juncheros. Juncheros blinked. They saw a totally different environment. The sky and the ground was on fire. The entire world was enveloped red flames. Something was wrong. From all the times they used their power, this never happened. Juncheros started shaking. They felt fear. They felt a large presence looking down on them from a very high place. Haha, they had a hard time talking properly. The only thing they could do was watch. You insignificant thing, Juncheros heard a voice from the high place. Juncheros couldn't even disagree with their statement. The fire that was burning the entire world disappeared, and a figure that was larger than them enveloped the world Juncheros now knew. They realized that they were at a disadvantage. They managed to talk after gathering their energy. Key King of Greed, Juncheros, couldn't resist. Greed devoured Juncheros' mind. Their existence was exterminated. Chapter 69. Dungeon Offense 5. It felt like time stopped. Inside the room where the battle was taking place, everyone remained still as if they froze. They were so still that one would probably wonder if they remembered how to breathe, but it didn't last long. The one that broke the silence was surprisingly the one that caused the silence. Juncheros' large body fell to the ground. It seemed like he was just leaning over, but he must have not been able to handle his weight because his body fell and he didn't move anymore. He had a blank look on his face. Pant Pa, Yong-ho, who was being weighed down by Yunga-kos, raised himself up while panting. Catalina, who was within Yong-ho's arms, quickly used her arms and legs to help him. It was hard to tell how this happened. Jung Keros fell on Yong-ho and their eyes met. And a few seconds later, Jung Keros became unconscious. Mind depression, Yong-ho quietly spoke while trying to collect his breath. The sight of greed devouring Jung Keros impacted Yong-ho. Jung Keros and Yong-ho were on the same level, so when Jung Keros couldn't resist greed, it excited Yong-ho. They tried to control my mind. That was enough. The orcs were surprised because they didn't know what he meant, but it wasn't the same for Catalina and Ophelia. Ophelia actually felt joy and fear at the same time. Her joy was because of greed. Her fear was also because of greed. Jung Keros protected his place as the owner for many years. However, they were just an owner of a small dungeon in an empty land. In the end, they couldn't go up against one of the 7 deadly sins that was greed's power. It was such a strong will, it made her happy. The fact that the man standing in front of her was her happy made her extremely happy. But at the same time, she felt fear. The day she first saw him at the pub. If Yong-ho didn't stop, Ophelia could be ended up the same way as Jung Keros. It would have destroyed her mind and caused her to blank out like him. She didn't even want to think about it. She recalled the time she encountered Aemon and greed within Yong-ho's mind. It felt like she was going to fall into that fiery world again if she closed her eyes. Ophelia kept on gulping. Her body was covered in sweat. On the other hand, Catalina was feeling happy. She smiled brightly, as if she was showing off the fact that Yong-ho was her master and also the owner of the House of Mammon. The way her tail and ears moved showed how excited she was. Rickham recalled what happened at the bar, and the reason he trembled was different from Ophelia's. Rickham didn't know about greed or Aemon. Because of that, Rickham believed that Yong-ho used a mind defense skill that overpowered Jung Keros. Taking control of the female pub owner was surprising enough, but within a few seconds, Yong-ho was able to destroy an owner's mind. Yong-ho's state of mind of powerful. He earned a great deal of respect. Rickham's eyes went from Yong-ho to Jung Keros, and then to Ophelia. Ophelia, who was covered in sweat, noticed Rickham looking at her, and as the pub's female owner, she was able to catch Rickham's inner thoughts through his expression. Even though her hands and feet were trembling in fear because of greed and Aemon, she forced a smile on her face and stood up from her seat. Someone needed explain. The current situation, Jung Keros tried to take control of the owner's mind. But it was a very stupid act. Taking control of the mind isn't one-sided. It's safe to say that it's a mind battle between two figures. Jung Keros probably thought they were a wave, and they also thought the owner was some sort sand castle. But the owner was actually a shield. A kind of shield that will break the wave, and the result of that is shown right before you. The orcs widened their eyes when they heard Ophelia's explanation. They nodded as if they now understood, and along with Catalina, they expressed their surprise and satisfaction at the same time. After feeling satisfied by how the orcs reacted, Ophelia winked at Yong-ho. Usually, someone would either kick the floor, and others would complain jokingly, but they didn't have the energy to do that. Their backs were still wet. They tried to hide it, but their legs were slightly shaking as well. That's what Ophelia's wink meant. After standing up from his seat, Yong-ho answered the spirits that were focusing on him. His short answer made them cheer. We won, a declaration of victory. Catalina and Skull were the first spirits to cheer. Even though his body was full of energy, his mind was exhausted. The length of the battle was short and was mostly one-sided. All Yong-ho did was kick Ophelia and roll on the floor with Catalina. Im not sly, im not sly. After defending himself, he headed towards Foras Dungeons. Heart of the dungeon with the spirits. Yong-ho decided to absorb Jung Keros' spirit later since their mind had been destroyed. It was a simple reason. It was to prevent the news of Jung Keros' death from spreading. If the owner dies, then the spirit of the dungeon dies. When Foras died, the spirit of the dungeon in Foras Dungeon died as well, and Foras' successor and the butler clearly sensed Foras' death. There was no reason to give unnecessary information to the House of Abigail. If they found out that Yongcheros died, then they would have made a move. Either the successor or the butler will take the spirits and lead them to Foras dungeon. Those kind of things should happen later, a day or two later, after Yong-ho and the House of Mammon's spirits took the items they needed. Even though the orcs had a hard time carrying Junkaros' ogre-like body, it couldn't be helped. Yong-ho did his best to ignore the pants he was hearing behind him and continued moving forward. After being accompanied by Catalina, Skull, and Ophelia, Young-ho entered the heart of the dungeon and didn't waste any time. After standing in front of the heart of the dungeon, he raised both of his hands. Since the spirit of the dungeon died, there wasn't much of a reaction. The only thing Young-ho felt was a strong shield. After pouring his mana, he forcefully broke the shield. Young-ho absorbed the heart of the dungeon's mana. When Young-ho poured out his mana, the heart of the dungeon released a red light. The heart was resisting. The dungeon can be considered as an enormous spirit, and even though they lost their will, they still had their survival instincts. Young-ho gritted his teeth. He understood the mana by hitting on it. There was a reason why the small fries waited months for the House of Mammon's shield around the heart weakened. If Young-ho didn't grow through the power of evolution and spirit absorption, he would have died already. Of course, he chose to take a break after pouring his mana. Since mana hasn't been added to the heart of the dungeon, it was in its original condition, but Young-ho wasn't going to take care of it all at once, and the reason for that was simple as well. It looks uncool. There were a lot of eyes watching. After his fight with Jungcheros, the orcs started looking at Young-ho with respect and praised him. Catalina looked at him the same way. It felt like she was saying, "If it's the master, if it's our master." In order to protect the owner's dignity and loyalty, it had to be ended quickly. Young-ho overdid it, and he got rewarded it for his hard work. The shield around the heart of the dungeon couldn't endure Young-ho's mana and broke. To Young-ho, it felt like a window shattered. The heart of the dungeon, which was as big as two fists put together, broke, and a small marble that was a bit larger than a thumb appeared. The red light that appeared was the dungeon spirit. When it landed in his hand, he felt a strong mana. Also, despite the fact that the owner died and the dungeon was shut down, the heart of the dungeon still had a large of mana within them. Greed started wiggling. Even though they didn't say anything, Greed was definitely reacting to the mana that was in front of them. Young-ho was patient. After grabbing the spirit tightly, he opened the leather pouch that was hanging from his waist. Young-ho closed his eyes shut and put the spirit inside the pouch. The heart of the dungeon was the only one that could effectively absorb a heart of the dungeon spirit. This was Lucius' job. In order to build various facilities within the dungeon and increase the dungeon's defensive power, Young-ho had to increase Lucius' powers. I still have work to do, but it wasn't something he could do right away. Even though he became exhausted after breaking the heart's shield, Young-ho gave his next order instead of resting. Rickham, gather all the valuable items in Foras dungeon and move it to the dungeon's entrance room. Since the dungeon's heart is destroyed, the traps won't work. Young-ho was now used to giving orders. After Rickham showed his respect, he took the orcs and walked out. Young-ho looked at Ophelia next. "Ophelia, go back to the pub." "Yes, sir." "I'll make up a story saying that the House of Foras owner and Jongcheros put their life on the line and killed each other. However, it'll only act as a setup. The information isn't something I can announce by using the pub's name." Young-ho was satisfied by how quickly she understood his intentions when he ordered her to return to the pub. And Ophelia was feeling satisfied as well. She was happy about serving a master that was capable and friendly. Young-ho spoke while smiling. "That's fine. If it buys us more time, I'm satisfied with that. And I'm sure it'll cause some chaos too. The story about the House of Foras owner and Jungcheros killing each other can be easily made up. But who was the one that destroyed the heart of the dungeon? Who absorbed Jungcheros' spirit and who took the dungeon's treasures? Anyone with a brain would question those things, and there were only a few who could actually do those things. They couldn't use the pub to spread vague information like that. The relationship between the pub and the House of Mammon had to be kept a secret, a baseless rumor. The source will be unknown, but it was a convincing story. Saying that the spirits that ran away from the House of Foras saw it was enough. And this kind of rumor was enough to make the nearby owners confused. The House of Abigail won't be able to easily make their next move, and the other owners won't be able to easily confirm that this was all done by the House of Mammon's owner. Then, I'll take my leave. I hope you'll forgive me for not being able to send a separate carriage. That's fine, and thanks for today. And I'm sorry for kicking you. Ophelia laughed at Yong-ho's last comment. Like always, the way she bowed reminded him of musical actors that bowed at the end of the show. After that, she left the House of Foras. They must have used a lot of money on increasing the dungeon's defense after Foras died, because the House of Foras didn't have a lot of treasures. However, it was still more than what the House of Mammon currently had. In the carriages that they rode in, it was filled with various gold and valuable items. But Young-ho didn't stop there. He took the artifacts that both Yongcharos and Kun had. He thought about taking the living armors and melting them, but it would be odd if there weren't any signs of there being a fight, so he only took half of them. Since the seats were filled with items, they had no choice but to walk. But the spirits all had bright smiles on their faces. They felt good about winning, but it's because Young-ho promised a special bonus. It took them about 3 hours to collect the items after the fight was over. Within the deepest part of the House of Foras, Young-ho saw Yongcharos' lifeless body. A demon king's power was like the Joker in a card game. Young-ho was able to easily defeat Yongcharos since their power was mind control. But when looking at just the process of the battle, there were a lot of close calls. Kun changed the battle when Young-ho assumed that Kun could no longer fight, and Kun was only able to fight because of Yongcharos' power. Foras broke through Aemon's fire through coldness. Yongcharos made Kun move, despite of them being unable to move. What kind of powers did the other demon kings have? And among the kings that had the 7 deadly sins, what were they like? Young-ho emptied his head. Instead of contemplating, he stretched out his hand and placed it on Yongcharos' forehead. Getting stronger. Young-ho's power of evolution and Greed's power were getting stronger. A light appeared. Greed devoured Yongcharos' spirit. Chapter 70. Dungeon Upgrade. 1. Yongcharos' spirit was delicious. The quality wasn't as good as Foras' spirit, but when looking at just the amount of the mana, it was more than Foras. When comparing it to food, it lacks flavor, but it can make a person feel full. Yongcharos' element was darkness. Greed embraced Yongcharos' darkness this time too, and Young-ho felt a new element take place within his mana. Mana made up a demon's body and spirit, and among them, the demon kings had a lump of mana that was purer than ordinary demons. A new horn didn't develop, however, his other skills increased. Young-ho enjoyed his powerful body and breathed in deeply. Even though he was just breathing in, he felt mana boiling in various parts of his body. When Young-ho felt the change, Catalina and Skull also realized that they changed. Catalina's darkness became stronger. The mana that helped Skull move their dead body became sturdier. Foras' power, coldness, became Young-ho's attribute. Yongcharos' mind control made Young-ho's mind stronger. Great. After feeling refreshed from absorbing the spirit, Young-ho quickly wrapped everything up. Yongcharos was dead, and this news was going to be delivered to the House of Abigail. Young-ho was sure that they were going to make a move. They might send some soldiers to the House of Foras. When looking at Yongcharos' war carriage up close, Young-ho noticed that it was badly damaged. The horses that pulled the carriage ran away, and the stone that was stored inside disappeared. Some of the spirits that left the House of Foras must have taken it. With Rikum in the lead, the House of Mammon's spirits marched. Young-ho was in the forest that Salami was hiding in and rode on their back. The dungeon meerkats that belonged to the House of Foras looked at Young-ho desperately. It was hard to tell what the dungeon meerkats and Salami talked about while he was inside, but it looked like they were begging him to take them with him. Skull. Skull. After placing the 2 dungeon meerkats on each shoulder, Skull walked behind the group. Like always, Salami powerfully flew up into the air, tired. After lying on Salami's back, Young-ho looked off into the distance. The sun was setting in the demon world. He wanted to sleep, but he couldn't. Young-ho forced himself to stay awake and looked at the ground. After spacing out a bit, he activated the power of evolution on the spirits. After looking at each one, he exclaimed without knowing. It wasn't because Catalina became stronger after Yong-ho himself became stronger. Yong-ho was focused on Skull. When did it get to 100? After the Unity evolution, Skull did participate in every battle, but the last time he checked, it was only at 50. Yong-ho smiled when he recalled something. On the day when Eligor was training all night, Skull was rolling around the training ground. Skull did the same thing the next day. Since Skull evolved several of times, building the development rate in the training ground was difficult. He found because when they first discovered the training ground, Skull had to use the hammer many times in order to gain 1 point. It did increase, but it meant that Skull would have to continuously use their hammer to fill the development rate. Physical labor, that was Skull's and the undead strength. Skull didn't get tired. They had a remarkable talent when it came to doing repetitive jobs. When Eligor was spending all of his energy in the training ground, Skull was also using their hammer in the corner of the room. Even when Eligor left to do other tasks, Skull kept on hitting the puppets, and their efforts reached to 100 rock skeleton night. It was Skull's new advancement route. Skull must have noticed Yong-ho looking at them, because Skull looked up and waved their hammer. Yong-ho couldn't hear them clearly, but it sounded like they were saying, Skull. Yong-ho closed his eyes after feeling extremely satisfied. It was only for a moment, but Yong-ho slept on Salami's back. Oh, you're back. Just like the time when they returned from the Free City, Eligor and the other spirits greeted Yong-ho at the dungeon entrance room. Rikum, who was leading the spirits, didn't have to say anything for them to realize the fact that Yong-ho won. The carriage full of items was proof of that. Since our side won, I'm happy. The goblins had simple thoughts like that, and Spot had even simpler thoughts. Yong-ho wasn't sure if it was because of the atmosphere, but the Princess Ant had a small smile on her face. Yong-ho let the dungeon meerkats meet their new family, and after getting off of Salami's back, he looked at Eligor. Despite of the fact that he became more built through the evolution, tears filled his eyes, and Yong-ho smiled at him. I'm back. Eligor wiped his tears with a handkerchief and nodded his head. Just like how Catalina and Skull got stronger, Eligor also became stronger thanks to Yong-ho. When looking at just the physical strength alone, it was safe to say that the House of Mammon was the strongest. Oh, but instead of being happy about, Eligor looked at everyone with a perplexed expression. No matter how many times he blinked, there was something he didn't see. And no way. If someone didn't come back after leaving for battle, it only meant one thing. Yong-ho started blinking and wondered what was going on, but he realized that Eligor was worried about Ophelia. Eligor didn't know that she returned first, and after seeing his worried expression, Yong-ho wanted to play jokes on him. Is it because they're the same race? No. It could be more than that. Yong-ho stopped himself from smiling and started calming himself down. He was going to announce Ophelia's death while making the saddest expression. However, beside Yong-ho, there was a spirit that couldn't lie at all. In order to fulfill the master's order, Ophelia returned to the pub first. Oh, I see. Eligor let out a sigh, as if he really felt relieved, and Catalina wagged her tail while enjoying the sight she was seeing. Even though Catalina ruined his fun, Yong-ho ended up smiling. After patting Catalina's head, Yong-ho asked Eligor if they'd become close after arguing like cats and dogs. It affected him a lot. Eligor's red face became more red, and the spirits started taking out the items and organizing them after Eligor ordered them to do so. Yong-ho immediately headed towards the heart of the dungeon with Catalina. I was waiting for you. I know this is sudden, but congratulations on your victory, sir. It was easy to tell from her voice that she had high expectations. Lucia was connected to Yong-ho's mind, and out of the spirit of the dungeons, she was quite smart. Even though she couldn't see it, she assumed that Yong-ho brought her something. Thump, 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 thump. It sounded like she was begging him to give it to her, so Yong-ho chuckled. Even though he took out the House of Foras dungeon spirit, he didn't give it to her right away. He felt like playing a joke. Thank you for the food. He then closed his eyes. With a serious expression, he got ready to consume it, but in his head, he imagined Lucia being anxious and not being able to stay still. Really? Are you really going to eat it all? You're not going to give me any, really? Even though he couldn't hear it, he knew that was what she was thinking. It felt like he could see Lucia filled with tears in her eyes, just like Eligor was being sly, his natural personality. Yong-ho laughed out loud when he imagined Lucia crying because of his joke. He was taking it out on Lucia because his plan on making fun of Eligor failed, but he stopped. Lucius' body emitted an odd light, and he pushed in the House of Foras dungeon spirit into the heart of the dungeon. It was the same refreshing feeling he felt when he first absorbed the spirit. Lucia felt that as well. That feeling was so great that even Yong-ho was affected by it, even though they were only connected through their minds. GKD Kroj KD Kar Sjan Akddd Jdis Jan. She must have lost it because Lucia yelled with a strange voice, and it didn't just stop there. If the owner becomes stronger, the dungeon becomes stronger, and when the dungeon becomes stronger, the owner becomes stronger as well. The heart of the dungeon released a light. The light was more intense than the time he consumed the landworm spirit. He'll begin the development. The heart of the dungeon will become bigger and more beautiful, and he'll have better control over the dungeon. Once it's completed, I can begin building new dungeon facilities. I can also improve the facilities that we already have. I need about a day to develop. Please wait one day, she spoke coldly at first, and then spoke like her usual self towards the end. The heart of the dungeon started wiggling like a slime. Instead of releasing an intense light, a faint green light was released. Dungeon spirit. Mid-rank training ground. Dungeon bathhouse. Stronger wall. Secret passageway between rooms. Dungeon mid-rank workshop. Dungeon of space. Completed, the words of light that displayed in the air reminded him of when games updated. It was faint, but he saw a video as well. The dungeon bathroom that will help relieve exhaustion. Try using it to relieve the spirit's exhaustion. In a low voice, Catalina read one of the sentences that was displayed in the air. Just like the dorms, it's a facility that uses mana to help the spirits relax. The mid-rank training ground and secret passageway caught Yong-ho's attention. Eligor and Skull were able to develop faster than expected, thanks to the basic training ground. Once the mid-rank training ground is completed, Catalina and the other spirits will be able to grow as well. And the secret passageway. After recalling the net-like passageway that was installed in the House of Foras, Yong-ho nodded his head. Even though the passageway that was installed in the House of Foras was a bit too much, if they used it right, then it would be useful when suppressing the enemy, and everyone will be able to discreetly move between the rooms and the door of the space. The facility that Kaiwan stopped building, the very thing that was on top of Yong-ho's to-do list. Lucia fell asleep. When Yong-ho realized it, he looked at Catalina so that they can quietly leave the room. But why? Catalina looked at the words of light with an extremely anxious expression. Her ears and tail looked really weak too. Catalina. When he called Catalina, she became flustered and looked back at him. After displaying her cold female guard look, she took a step forward and exited the heart of the dungeon's room. Yong-ho looked at the word of light again. Which one of those made Catalina feel anxious? He didn't think long. Yong-ho stopped thinking and exited the heart of the dungeon's room. Catalina, who was waiting for him outside of the room, greeted Yong-ho with a bright smile. Did I imagine it? No way, he definitely saw it. But he stopped thinking about it, and since Catalina was back to her usual self, Yong-ho turned his attention elsewhere. He returned to the dungeon and completed the major tasks. Now, all he had to do was rest. No, that's not true. His work wasn't done. He needed to complete as many things as possible before the House of Abigail and the owners started making their moves. I hope you're not thinking about exploring the dungeon, Catalina asked while inspecting Yong-ho's expression. But Yong-ho shook his head. If possible, he wanted to collect all of Kai Wane's inheritance. But since Lucia was asleep, exploring the dungeon was impossible. There was something else. After petting Catalina's head, Yong-ho looked back at the throne. I love you, valuable customer. What can I help you with?